I've been running freight on I-64 through West Virginia for 12 years, which in the trucking industry means I've crossed the Allegheny Mountains approximately 3,000 times, the eastbound climb from the Kanawha Valley to the summit and the westbound descent back into the valley, constituting the particular stretch of interstate that every driver who runs this corridor knows intimately, and that every driver respects because the terrain demands respect. The grades steep enough that loaded trucks lose speed on the climbs and gain speed on the descents, and the curves frequent enough that the combination of weight and momentum and grade produces the conditions that fill the runaway ramps. With the trucks of drivers who didn't respect the terrain enough, the corridor runs from Charleston east to the Virginia border, approximately 60 miles of mountain interstate that crosses the Allegheny Plateau through terrain that required the engineers who built the highway to cut through ridges and bridge valleys and construct the particular infrastructure, mountain interstate travel, the truck lanes and the runaway ramps, and the chain-up areas and the way stations that the state uses to monitor the commercial traffic that uses the corridor. The way stations are fixtures of the drive, the particular landmarks that truckers use to track their progress, the stations appearing at predictable points on the route, the lights visible from the highway, the scales either open or closed, the signs either directing trucks to enter or allowing them to bypass, the routine of commercial vehicle enforcement operating as a background element of the driving experience that is as automatic as the shifting of gears on the grades. The Midland Trailway Station sat on the eastbound side of I-64 at approximately the 40-mile mark, a standard installation that I'd been passing or entering for the entire 12 years of my tenure on this corridor. The station was a concrete block building with a booth and scales, and the standard configuration that West Virginia uses for commercial vehicle enforcement, the design functional and institutional, the building showing the particular appearance of a government facility that is maintained to the minimum standard that function requires and that aesthetics have no relationship to. I'd been weighed at that station maybe 200 times, the routine of pulling onto the scale and sitting while the officer checked the weight and the credentials and the load documentation, the particular interaction between trucker and enforcement that is cordial and efficient, and that both parties want to conclude as quickly as possible so the truck can get back on the highway and the officer can process the next vehicle. November 2022, a Tuesday night, technically Wednesday morning, approximately 2 a.m. I was running a load of manufactured goods from a distribution center in Huntington to a warehouse in Staunton, Virginia, the standard overnight run that I made twice a week on this corridor, the timing designed to put me at the warehouse when the receiving dock opened at 6 a.m. The weather was rain, not the light, intermittent rain that the mountains produce as a background condition, but a sustained, heavy rain that the November systems deliver when the moisture from the Gulf meets the cold air that the Alleghenies channel down from the north, the particular rain that turns the highway into a surface of reflected light and spray, and that reduces the visibility to the distance that the headlights can penetrate through the water that fills the air between the truck and whatever is ahead. I was running eastbound at approximately 50 miles per hour. The reduced speed, a concession to the rain, and the visibility and the grade that was climbing toward the summit, the truck loaded and heavy, the engine working against the slope, the wipers beating at their fastest setting and still barely clearing the windshield before the rain replaced what they'd removed. The highway was empty, in the way that mountain interstates are empty, at 2 a.m. in a rainstorm. The traffic reduced to the occasional truck and the rare passenger vehicle, the road belonging to the drivers who run through the night because the freight doesn't wait for weather. The way station appeared in my headlights. The sign first, the green overhead sign that says "Weech Station" with the distance, the standard notification that a station is ahead and that commercial vehicles must enter unless the sign says closed. The sign said open. The arrow was lit, the green light directing trucks to the right lane and the entrance ramp. The particular instruction that means pull in, you're being weighed tonight. The station was lit, fully lit, the building showing lights in every window, the scale area illuminated by the overhead fixtures that provide the light that officers need to conduct nighttime inspections, the entire facility operating at full capacity, the lights bright enough to cut through the rain with the particular intensity of institutional lighting that is designed for visibility rather than ambience. The contrast between the dark, rain-filled highway and the lit station was sharp, the facility appearing as an island of illumination in the mountain darkness, the building and the scales and the booth showing with a clarity that the rain-soaked highway couldn't match. I pulled in. The entrance ramp curved to the right and descended slightly to the scale area, the standard configuration, the truck's tires finding the concrete surface that the scales occupied, the particular change in road texture that tells you you're on the platform and that the weight is being measured. I stopped on the scale and looked at the booth. An officer was in the booth, standing behind the window, the figure visible in the lit interior, wearing the uniform that the Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Division uses, the particular dark shirt and the badge and the hat that West Virginia officers wear when they're conducting weigh station operations. The officer looked at my truck, looked at a screen that was presumably showing my weight, and activated the light system that directs trucks to either proceed or pull to the secondary inspection area. The light directed me to the secondary area. I pulled forward and parked in the designated spot, and the officer came out of the booth and walked to my truck through the rain and conducted an inspection that was, in every detail that I could observe, a standard commercial vehicle inspection. He checked my CDL. He checked my medical card. He checked my logbook, the paper backup that I carry, in addition to the electronic logging device. He walked around the truck and the trailer, checking the tires and the lights and the securing devices on the load. He checked the trailer's registration and the load documentation. The inspection was thorough and professional, the particular systematic examination that an experienced officer conducts when they're checking a truck that they've selected for inspection, each element evaluated in sequence, the officer's knowledge of the regulations evident in the specificity of what he checked and the order in which he checked it. He filled out the paperwork. An inspection form, the standard document that records the results of a commercial vehicle inspection, printed on the form stock that the state uses, the station's designation number in the header, the date and the time filled in, the truck's information recorded, the inspection results documented. The form was standard. The printing was standard. The format was identical to every inspection form I'd ever received at every weigh station in West Virginia in 12 years of driving. He signed it. The officer signed the form with a name that I read and that I didn't recognize, which was normal because the Enforcement Division employs dozens of officers, and the likelihood of being inspected by the same officer twice is low. The signature was neat, the handwriting confident, the name legible. He handed me the form and told me to have a safe drive, and I said thank you, and I pulled out of the inspection area and merged back onto I-64 and continued east through the rain toward the summit. The inspection took approximately 20 minutes. Standard duration, standard process, standard interaction. The paperwork went into my logbook where inspection paperwork goes. The form filed with the other documents that the regulations require me to carry, the record of a routine weigh station inspection on an interstate in West Virginia on a rainy November night. I mentioned it to my dispatcher the next morning when I called in after the Staunton delivery. Mentioned it in passing, the way you mention a weigh station inspection, as a detail of the run rather than as a significant event, the particular casualness of a trucker noting that he was weighed and inspected on a corridor where being weighed and inspected is a regular occurrence. My dispatcher was quiet, the particular quiet of a person processing information that doesn't match what they know. He said the Midland Trail Weigh Station had been closed for renovation since September. He said the building was under construction. He said the scales had been removed. He said the power had been disconnected from the facility and that no commercial vehicle enforcement operations were being conducted at that location. I told him I'd been there 12 hours ago. I told him the station was open and lit and staffed, and that an officer had conducted an inspection and that I had the paperwork. He asked me to read the station designation number from the form. I read it. He confirmed it was the Midland Trail Station's number. He asked me to read the officer's name. I read it. He said he'd check with the Enforcement Division. He called me back that afternoon. The name on the form did not match any officer employed by the West Virginia Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Division, not currently and not historically. The state police, who oversee the Enforcement Division, had no record of an officer by that name having been employed in any capacity at any time. I drove past the Midland Trailway Station the following week. Daylight, clear weather, the visibility unrestricted. The station was surrounded by construction fencing, the orange plastic mesh that contractors use to isolate work areas. The building's windows were covered in plastic sheeting. The scales were torn up, the concrete surface of the weigh platform demolished. the rebar exposed, the particular state of a facility that is being reconstructed from the ground level up. The booth where the officer had stood was visible through the fence, an empty shell, the interior gutted, the walls stripped to studs, the wiring exposed, the space showing no equipment, no screens, no lights, no evidence that anyone had been standing in it, conducting inspections. The construction had been ongoing since September. 2 months before my inspection, the station had been closed, gutted, and de-energized for 2 months before I pulled onto scales that didn't exist and was inspected by an officer who doesn't exist in a facility that was producing light and heat and administrative paperwork from a building that had no power. The form is in my logbook. I've looked at it many times. The station designation number is correct. The date is correct. The time is correct. The truck information is correct. The inspection findings are correct, noting no violations. The standard clean inspection that a well-maintained truck produces. The signature is clear and confident and belongs to no one. I've talked to other drivers. Carefully, the way you talk about things that you're not sure the other person will accept. 2 drivers have told me they've experienced something similar, not at the Midland Trail Station specifically, but at other facilities on other corridors, way stations that they entered and were inspected at, and that they later learned were closed or demolished, or in some cases had been demolished for years before the night they pulled onto the scales and were weighed. One driver told me about a station in Kentucky that he'd been inspected at in 2019 and that he'd later determined had been closed since 2014. He said the inspection was normal. He said the paperwork was normal. He said the officer was professional and thorough, and that the form in his logbook was stamped with the station's designation number and signed by an officer who wasn't in the state system. He said the stations are still running, not in the daylight, not for the cars and the trucks that pass during business hours, at night, in the rain. For the drivers who are running the mountain corridors at 2 and 3 in the morning, when the traffic is thin and the visibility is low, and the conditions are right for a closed station to open and a demolished building to stand and a non-existent officer to wave you onto scales that were torn up months ago. The form is real, the signature is real, the inspection was real, conducted by a man in a uniform in a building with lights and scales and paperwork. And the building is a shell, and the scales are rubble, and the man doesn't exist. And the form sits in my logbook, dated and stamped and signed, the documentation of an inspection that happened in a facility that wasn't there, conducted by an officer who has never been, on a night when the rain was heavy and the mountains were dark and the way station was open. For me, at 2 a.m. in November. And I wonder who else it opens for. What other drivers pull onto scales that the daylight shows as demolished and hand their paperwork to an officer that the state police can't identify? What the inspections are checking, what the officer is looking for in the logbooks and the loads and the credentials of the drivers who enter a station that the highway says is closed and that the rain says is open. The form is in my logbook. The station is under construction, and the name on the signature line belongs to no one. And I drive past it twice a week, and the construction fencing stands, and the building is gutted. Most nights, I run fuel through the mountains of eastern Kentucky, which means I drive a tanker truck loaded with gasoline and diesel through terrain that was not designed for tanker trucks, and that tolerates them only because the communities in the hollows need fuel, and because the fuel has to get there somehow, and the somehow is me, a 47-year-old man in a truck that weighs 60,000 pounds loaded, navigating roads that were built for the coal trucks that used to run these hollows and that have been maintained to a standard that the word maintain doesn't quite describe, the pavement cracked and patched and narrowed by decades of erosion and budget shortfalls, and the particular indifference that the state applies to roads that serve communities too small to generate the political pressure that maintenance requires. I've been running these routes for 9 years. Floyd County, Pike County, Knott County, the mountain counties where the hollows run deep and the roads follow the creek bottoms, and the communities that the coal industry built are slowly losing the population that the coal industry's decline is taking away. The stations I deliver to are the small independents that serve these communities, the 2-pump operations that occupy a corner lot at the mouth of a hollow and that provide fuel to the people who live up the hollow and who don't want to drive 30 minutes to the nearest chain station for a tank of gas. The deliveries run at night because the roads are emptier at night, And because a loaded tanker on a mountain road requires the absence of oncoming traffic that the nighttime provides, the particular advantage of driving at hours when the road belongs to whoever is on it. I know these roads. 9 years of weekly runs has given me the particular familiarity that develops when you drive the same routes on the same schedule for long enough that the driving becomes automatic. The truck following the road, the way your hand follows the banister on a staircase, you've climbed 10,000 times. The terrain processed by the body rather than the mind, the curves anticipated, the grades prepared for, the particular features of each route committed to a physical memory that operates below conscious navigation. The route through the hollow in Floyd County was one of my regulars. A 2-lane road that left the state highway and followed a creek upstream through a narrow valley, the road climbing gradually as the hollow narrowed, the terrain steep on both sides, the forest pressing close, the particular geography of an eastern Kentucky hollow, where the road and the creek share the valley bottom, because the valley bottom is the only flat ground, and because the creek was there first and the road was built beside it. The road served a handful of communities, small clusters of houses and a church and occasionally a store, the rural infrastructure of mountain life strung along the highway that connected them. About 4 miles into the hollow, the road crossed the creek. The crossing was a low-water ford, a concrete surface laid across the creek bed where the road descended to creek level and the pavement ran through the water. The particular engineering solution that mountain road builders use when a bridge is too expensive and the traffic is too light to justify the cost, and the creek is small enough that a concrete ford provides adequate passage for everything, except the highest flows. I'd been driving through this ford every week for 9 years, the tanker's tires splashing through 6 inches of water on a normal day, and through maybe a foot during spring rains. The ford functional in all but the worst conditions, the crossing as familiar to me as my own driveway. March of 2023. A Thursday night, approximately 1 in the morning. The rain had started around 10 and had intensified through the evening into the kind of sustained mountain rain that March produces in eastern Kentucky, the heavy, warm rain of early spring that melts the residual snow at elevation, and that combines the melt with the rainfall to produce the particular volume of water that the creeks carry during March when every drainage in the mountains is running, at or above capacity. The rain was heavy enough to reduce visibility to approximately 50 feet, the headlights of the tanker cutting a short tunnel through water that filled the air as a continuous sheet rather than individual drops, the wipers fighting a losing battle against a volume of water that exceeded their capacity to clear. I was running a delivery to a station at the head of the hollow, a small independent that I supplied every Thursday night, the route automatic, the driving automatic, the particular late-night rhythm of a tanker driver running a familiar route in conditions that were less than ideal, but that were within the parameters of what 9 years of mountain driving had prepared me for. Rain is rain. You slow down, you increase following distance, you pay attention, and you drive through it because the fuel needs to get there, and the road is the only way, and the rain doesn't change the route. I approached the creek crossing at about the 4-mile mark, the section of road where the pavement descended to the ford and where, on this night in this rain, the creek would be running high, the water across the ford deeper than normal, maybe 18 inches based on the conditions, the kind of depth that the tanker could handle, but that required attention, the driver maintaining speed through the water rather than stopping in the middle where the current could push the truck sideways on the slick concrete surface. The bridge appeared in my headlights from about 100 feet away, the distance at which the rain allowed the headlight beam to resolve solid objects into recognizable shapes. Not the ford, not the concrete surface descending to creek level. A bridge. A steel truss bridge spanning the creek at a height above the water, the structure rising from abutments on both banks, the trusses forming the characteristic triangular pattern that steel truss bridges produce, the deck visible between the trusses as a surface of wooden planks laid across steel I-beams. I process the bridge with the delayed recognition of a man who is seeing something that doesn't belong where it is, and whose brain is working to reconcile the visual information with the known geography. There was no bridge at this crossing. There had never been a bridge at this crossing in the 9 years I'd been driving this route. The crossing was a ford, a concrete surface at creek level, and the concrete surface was not beneath my tires, and a bridge was ahead of me in the rain, and my truck was approaching it at the speed that the road and the rain permitted. I drove onto the bridge. The transition from pavement to deck was marked by the particular change in sound that a vehicle produces when it moves from asphalt to wood, the tires finding the planks with a thump that resonated through the cab, the hollow sound of a wooden deck beneath a heavy vehicle, the planks flexing under the tanker's weight, with the particular give that wooden bridge decks produce when they're carrying a load that approaches their capacity. The sound was real. The flex was real. The bridge was bearing 60,000 pounds of truck and fuel, and the deck was responding to the weight with the physical behavior of a real structure under real load. The trusses rose on both sides of the truck, the steel framework visible in the headlights as I crossed, the diagonal members and the vertical members forming the lattice pattern that truss bridges use to distribute load, the steel showing rust, the heavy oxidation of metal that has been exposed to mountain weather for decades, the particular orange-brown of rust that develops on steel that was painted once and that the paint has long since abandoned. The trusses were substantial, the members thick, the joints riveted rather than bolted, the construction showing the particular techniques of a bridge built in an era when steel was shaped by hand and assembled by rivets, and when the engineering was conservative and the structures were overbuilt because the builders understood that the mountain terrain would test whatever they constructed. The deck was maybe 60 feet long. I crossed it in maybe 4 seconds, the tanker rumbling across the planks with the heavy percussion of a loaded truck on a wooden surface, each plank producing its individual note as the tires passed over it. The cumulative sound, a sustained drum roll that I felt through the steering wheel and the seat and the floor of the cab, the bridge vibrating with the passage of the tanker in the way that bridges vibrate when they're doing their job. I came off the bridge on the far side, and the pavement was there, the road continuing up the hollow, the transition from deck to asphalt, marked by the return of the smooth tire noise that pavement produces, the bridge behind me in the rain, the crossing completed. I continued up the hollow and completed the delivery, and drove back down the hollow and crossed the ford on the return trip. The concrete surface, under maybe a foot of water, the tanker splashing through the creek at the crossing that I'd been using for 9 years. And that was the crossing I expected, and that was there, on the return trip, where it had always been. I didn't process the discrepancy that night. The rain and the fatigue and the particular focus that a nighttime tanker run in the mountains demands occupied the cognitive resources that the discrepancy required. The bridge filed away in the part of the brain that holds things it hasn't categorized yet, the experience stored without analysis, the memory intact but unexamined. The following Thursday, daylight, clear weather. I drove the same route to the same station at the same 4-mile mark where the road crossed the creek. The ford was there. The concrete surface, the water running across it at its normal march depth, the crossing exactly as it had been for 9 years, the low water ford that the county maintained and that every vehicle on this road used. No bridge, no abutments, the concrete or stone structures that bridges rest on and that remain after a bridge is removed, the particular evidence of a bridge that once stood at a crossing and that has been demolished. No marks on the banks where abutments would have been seated, no approach ramps, the graded sections of road that rise to meet a bridge deck. The banks on both sides showed the normal configuration of a ford crossing, the road descending to creek level and crossing and ascending on the other side, the geometry of a crossing that has been a ford for as long as the road has existed at this location. I asked the county road department. I drove to the county offices in Prestonsburg and I asked the engineer who manages the road system in this section of Floyd County whether a bridge had ever stood at the creek, crossing at the 4-mile mark of the road through the hollow. He pulled the records. He showed me the file. A bridge had stood at that crossing from 1934 to 1978. A single-lane steel truss bridge, riveted construction, wooden plank deck, built by the WPA during the Depression as part of the federal works program that constructed infrastructure throughout Appalachian Kentucky. The bridge had served the hollow for 44 years before the county replaced it with the concrete ford in 1978. The bridge demolished and the steel salvaged and the abutments removed and the crossing converted to the ford that I'd been driving through for 9 years. The engineer showed me a photograph, a black and white image from the county's historical files. The bridge photographed sometime in the 1960s based on the vehicles visible in the background. A single-lane steel truss bridge with riveted construction and a wooden plank deck spanning a creek in a hollow in Floyd County, the trusses showing the particular lattice pattern that I had seen in my headlights in the rain, the structure matching my memory with a precision that the 45-year gap between the photograph and my crossing should have made impossible. I crossed that bridge. In March of 2023, in the rain, at 1 in the morning, I drove a 60,000-pound tanker truck across a bridge that was demolished in 1978. The deck flexed under my weight. The planks rumbled under my tires. The trusses framed the sky on both sides. The bridge bore the load and the crossing completed, and I drove off the other side onto pavement that connected to a bridge that had been gone for 45 years. I've driven through the ford every Thursday since. The ford is there. The concrete surface, the creek, the crossing that replaced the bridge in 1978. The ford functions. The tanker splashes through, and the delivery continues, and the road does what the road does. But on that night in March, in the rain, the road did something different. The road provided a bridge that had been torn down 45 years earlier, standing in the rain at the crossing where it had stood for 44 years. The steel and the wood and the rivets, restored from whatever dimension demolished infrastructure occupies when it's no longer part of the physical world. The bridge present and functional and real enough to bear 60,000 pounds of tanker truck on a plank deck that rumbled under the tires with the particular sound of wood bearing weight. I wonder about the rain. Whether the rain is the condition, whether the heavy nighttime rain that fills the air and reduces visibility to 50 feet is the particular environment that allows the bridge to exist. The water in the air creating the medium that the bridge needs to manifest, the crossing reverting to its previous configuration when the conditions align, the ford becoming the bridge the way a road becomes a river when the water rises, the physical reality of the crossing changing from one state to another based on conditions that the daylight and the dry weather don't produce. The bridge was there from 1934 to 1978. 44 years of standing in that hollow, carrying the traffic that the hollow produced, the trucks and the cars and the people who used the crossing before the ford replaced it. 44 years of existence that the rain, on certain nights, reproduces for drivers who arrive at the right moment and who cross the bridge that the daylight says is gone. The ford is there, every Thursday, in daylight and in dry weather, and in the normal conditions that the normal world provides. But the bridge is there too, in the rain, at 1 in the morning, for whoever arrives at the crossing when the water fills the air and the visibility drops to 50 feet and the hollow decides to show what it held before the ford was poured and the bridge was demolished and the steel was salvaged. The planks rumbled under my tires, the deck flexed under my weight, and the bridge was real as the ford that replaced it, as real as the rain that brought it back. And the crossing holds both, the ford and the bridge, the 1,978 and the 1,934, the concrete and the steel, and the rain decides which one you get. Steel, structural beams and plate and rebar, and the particular inventory of metal that construction sites consume in quantities that require a flatbed trailer and a truck with enough horsepower to pull 40,000 pounds of steel up a mountain. Grade, without losing speed in the curves, where losing speed means losing momentum, and losing momentum on a loaded flatbed on a mountain road means the kind of situation that ends with a call to a tow company and a conversation with a dispatcher that nobody wants to have. I've been running these loads through the mountains of Southwest Virginia for 11 years, the routes taking me through terrain that the steel industry and the construction industry require me to cross, the ridges and the hollows of the Allegheny Mountains, providing the obstacles that the loads and the truck and the roads and I navigate together in the particular partnership that mountain trucking demands. The routes are secondary highways, not interstates, not the 4-lane divided roads that the trucking industry prefers and that the mountain terrain of Southwest Virginia doesn't provide for the distances that my deliveries cover. 2-lane roads, the state and county highways that follow the creek bottoms through hollows and climb the ridges through switchbacks, and that were designed for the coal trucks that built the economy of this region and that have been maintained at a standard that varies from adequate to theoretical depending on the county and the season and the particular relationship between the road budget and the terrain's determination to reclaim what the graders have scraped. Buchanan County is the western edge of Virginia, the county that sits on the Kentucky border, and that contains some of the most remote terrain in the state, the hollows running deep and narrow between ridges that climb to 3,000 feet, the roads following the creek bottoms through valleys that are barely wider than the pavement and the creek that the pavement shares the valley floor with. The county lost population when the coal industry declined and has continued losing it since. The houses in the hollows thinning, the community shrinking, the roads serving fewer people with each passing year, but maintaining the same lengths and the same grades and the same curves that they've always had because roads don't shrink when populations do. The route through the hollow was one I drove maybe twice a month, a two-lane road that connected a steel fabrication shop in the county to a state highway that would take me east toward the delivery site. The road followed a creek through a hollow that was typical of Buchanan County, steep-sided, heavily forested, the road and the creek sharing the valley bottom, the forest pressing close on both sides, the tree line beginning at the shoulder and climbing the slopes with the particular density that Appalachian hardwood maintains in hollows, where the moisture and the shade produce the conditions that maximize growth. October of 2022, a Wednesday night, approximately 1 in the morning. I'd loaded at the fabrication shop in the late afternoon and had spent the evening in the cab waiting for the rain to ease, which it didn't. The October storm system, maintaining its output with the steady persistence that mountain weather produces when the conditions lock in and the moisture continues, and the terrain channels the rain into the hollows and the hollows hold it. The rain was not extreme, not the flooding rain of spring, but steady and heavy enough to reduce visibility to a distance that made the headlights feel inadequate. The beams penetrating maybe 60 to 80 feet of rain-filled air before the water scattered the light into a diffused glow that showed shapes but not details. I decided to drive. The delivery had a morning deadline, and waiting for the rain to stop was not an option because the rain was not going to stop and the steel needed to arrive and the flatbed needed to be there when the construction crew started work at 7. I pulled out of the shop yard and turned onto the county road and entered the hollow with the loaded trailer behind me and the rain ahead of me and the particular resignation of a mountain trucker who has been driving in conditions like this for 11 years and who knows that the conditions are the conditions and that the driving is the driving and that the two happen simultaneously, whether you'd prefer them to or not. The hollow was dark. The particular darkness of a mountain hollow at 1 in the morning in rain, the sky blocked by clouds, the ridges blocking whatever ambient light the sky might have produced, the forest on both sides absorbing what the headlights put out and returning nothing, the road existing as a lit strip in an environment of total darkness, the truck moving through the hollow the way a submarine moves through deep water, the lights showing only what was immediately ahead and the darkness beyond the lights absolute. I was driving at approximately 40 miles per hour, a speed that balanced the delivery deadline against the visibility and the road conditions and the loaded weight of the trailer, the particular calculus that mountain trucking requires at every moment, the speed adjusted to the terrain and the weather and the load and the road surface and the dozen other variables that the mountains impose on the practice of moving heavy objects through steep terrain. I noticed the movement at about the 2-mile mark. In my peripheral vision, on the right side of the truck, at the tree line, a darkness that was moving. Not the static darkness of the forest, which was a wall of unmoving black at the edge of the headlight range. A moving darkness, a shape that was darker than the dark forest behind it, and that was traveling in the same direction I was traveling, parallel to the road, in the tree line, at a pace that was matching my speed. The first few seconds I attributed it to the rain. Rain on a windshield creates visual artifacts, the streaks and the distortions that water produces on glass when it's flowing faster than the wipers can clear it, the particular visual noise that rain generates and that the brain has to filter in order to extract the useful information from the distorted image. I thought the movement was a visual artifact produced by the rain on the passenger side window, the water creating the impression of motion in the tree line that wasn't there. It wasn't rain. The shape maintained its position as I drove, the movement consistent, the dark form tracking alongside my cab at the tree line, with a steadiness that rain artifacts don't produce. Rain artifacts shift and dissolve and reappear. This shape held its position relative to my truck, with the particular constancy of something that was maintaining pace intentionally, the dark form moving through the forest at my speed, at my position, in the tree line that was maybe 10 feet from the edge of the road. I looked right. Directly, turning my head from the road ahead to the passenger window, the conscious decision to look at what my peripheral vision had been tracking. The shape was there, in the tree line, visible through the rain-streaked passenger window, a dark form that was tall, taller than the understory vegetation that grew at the forest's edge. The top of the shape visible above the rhododendron and the laurel that lined the road, and that grew to maybe 6 or 7 feet. The shape extended above that vegetation, the top of it showing against the slightly less dark background of the upper forest, where the trunks were spaced further apart and where the ambient darkness was fractionally lighter than the darkness of the dense understory. The shape was running. The movement was fluid. The particular motion of something that was covering ground at speed. The body moving through the forest with a continuity that said running rather than walking, the pace matching 40 miles per hour, which is a speed that no human can sustain and that no animal I know of can sustain through dense forest for any distance. The vegetation that the shape was moving through, representing obstacles that any running organism would have to dodge or jump or push through, and that this shape was passing through without any visible interruption in its stride. I watched for maybe 3 seconds before returning my eyes to the road. 3 seconds of direct observation through a rain-streaked window at a shape that was running in the tree line at 40 miles per hour, with a fluidity that the terrain should have made impossible. The shape was dark, featureless in the rain and the night, showing no detail beyond its outline, the size and the height and the movement visible, but the specifics, clothing or fur or skin or any surface characteristic, invisible in the conditions. I checked the mirror, the right side mirror, angled to show the tree line beside the trailer. The shape was there, maintaining its position not just with the cab but with the road, the dark form visible in the mirror at the tree line, running, the pace unchanged, the position constant. 6 miles. The shape ran alongside my truck for approximately 6 miles through the hollow. I know the distance because I know the route and because I tracked the landmarks, the particular features of the road that I used for navigation, the creek crossings and the curves, and the occasional mailbox that marked the positions of houses that were set back from the road in the darkness. 6 miles of hollow, 6 miles of forest pressing close on both sides, 6 miles of a dark shape running in the tree line at 40 miles per hour beside a loaded flatbed in the rain. The pace never varied. The shape maintained its position at my cab with the particular precision of an escort, the distance from the road consistent, the speed matching mine exactly. When the road curved left, the tree line on the right followed the curve, and the shape followed the tree line, the running form adjusting its trajectory to maintain the parallel course that it had established at the 2-mile mark. When the road climbed slightly, the shape climbed with it. When the road straightened, the shape ran straight. Every variation in my path was matched with a fluidity that said the shape was not following the terrain but following me, navigating relative to my truck rather than relative to the forest. I heard nothing. The engine and the rain and the wipers produced enough ambient noise that sounds from outside the cab were reduced to whatever could penetrate the combination of glass and steel and mechanical noise that the truck generated. Whatever was running in the tree line at 40 miles per hour was either producing no sound or producing sound that the truck's noise floor concealed. 6 miles of running through dense Appalachian forest at highway speed without a sound that reached me through the cab, the shape moving through vegetation that should have been crashing and snapping beneath anything traveling through it at that pace. The hollow opened. At the 8-mile mark, the valley widened, the ridges pulling back from the road, the tree line retreating from the shoulder to a distance of maybe 50 yards, the forest edge no longer the wall of vegetation that it had been in the narrow section of the hollow, but a distant boundary across a field of grass and scrub that the wider valley floor provided. The shape was gone. At the point where the tree line pulled back from the road, where the intimate proximity of the forest to the pavement ended and the open ground began, the shape ceased to be visible, not because it had stopped, not because it had turned into the forest and run away from the road. It was simply not there when the tree line was no longer there, the shape ending where the close forest ended, as if the proximity of the trees to the road was the condition that the shape required and that the wider valley didn't provide. I drove the remaining miles to the state highway, in the particular silence that follows an experience the mind can't process. The rain continued, the wipers beat, the engine ran. The flatbed carried its steel through the mountains of southwest Virginia, and the tree lines on both sides were empty, and the forest held nothing that kept pace with my truck, and the hollow was behind me, and whatever had run beside me for 6 miles was in it. I've driven that hollow many times since. Day and night, rain and clear. The tree line is the tree line, the forest is the forest. Nothing runs alongside the truck. But on rainy nights, when the visibility drops and the hollow narrows and the tree line presses close to the road and the darkness beyond the headlights is complete, I watch the passenger window. I watch the tree line in my right mirror. I scan the edge of the forest at the limit of the headlight range for the dark shape that is taller than the understory and that moves with a speed and a fluidity that the forest should prevent and that the forest, on one night in October, did not prevent. 6 miles, 40 miles per hour, in the rain, in the tree line, running. And the hollow holds what it holds. And the rain fills the air with water that reduces the world to the distance the headlights reach. And the tree line presses close on both sides. And the truck moves through the hollow carrying its load. And some nights, something moves with it, matching speed, matching position, running in the dark beside the road with a patience that doesn't tire, and a pace that doesn't slow, and a presence that the rain reveals and the daylight denies. And the hollow ends, and the valley opens, and the shape is gone, until the next rain, and the next hollow, and the next time the tree line presses close enough for something to run alongside the truck in the dark. I've been running the I-77 corridor through West Virginia for 16 years, the north-south route that crosses the southern coalfields between Princeton and Charleston, through terrain that the interstate handles with the engineering solutions that mountain interstates require, the long grades and the tunnels and the bridges, and the particular infrastructure of a highway that was punched through the Appalachian Mountains because the traffic demanded it and that the mountains tolerate with the particular patience of a landscape that will be here after the highway is gone. The corridor is my office, the cab of the truck, the room where I spend more waking hours than any other room in my life, the highway unrolling beneath the wheels, with the repetitive familiarity of a job that is measured in miles and in years, and in the particular accumulation of experience that 16 years of driving the same route produces. The truck stops along the corridor are my landmarks, not the mile markers or the exit signs or the features that the highway provides for navigation, but the fuel stops and the diners and the parking areas that constitute the infrastructure of the trucker's world. The particular network of establishments that exist to serve the people who drive the trucks that keep the freight moving. I know every stop between Princeton and Charleston. I know which ones have good food, and which ones have clean restrooms, and which ones have parking that accommodates a 70-foot rig without requiring the kind of maneuvering that turns a fuel stop into a geometry problem. 16 years of stopping at the same places has converted them from businesses into something closer to waypoints, the specific locations where the driving pauses and the human needs are addressed, and the driving resumes. The truck stop near Beckley was one of the old ones, not a chain, not the corporate travel centers that have been replacing the independents along the interstates for the past 2 decades. An independent, the kind of truck stop that an individual or a family built in the 1970s or 1980s, when the interstate was new and the traffic was growing, and the economics of serving truckers was favorable enough to justify the construction of a fuel island and a diner and the particular infrastructure that truckers require. The stop showed its age in the way that independent truck stops show their age. The building functional but dated, the fixtures from a previous decade, the signage hand-painted, the particular patina of a business that has been maintained but not modernized, the owner investing enough to keep it operational and not enough to make it contemporary. The diner was attached to the fuel building, the standard configuration, a room with booths along the windows and a counter with stools and a kitchen behind the counter, and the particular smell of coffee and fried food that truck stop diners produce, with a consistency that transcends geography, the same smell in West Virginia that it is in Tennessee, that it is in Ohio, the universal olfactory signature of a place where truckers eat at 3 in the morning. January of 2023. A Thursday night, technically Friday morning, approximately 3 a.m. The weather was freezing rain, the particular winter hazard that the West Virginia mountains produce when the temperature at the surface is below freezing and the temperature aloft is above, the rain falling as liquid and freezing on contact with every surface it touches, coating the highway and the bridges and the trucks and the buildings, with a layer of ice that accumulates at a rate that converts a drivable road into an undrivable one within minutes. The conditions were bad enough that the highway department had issued an advisory recommending that commercial vehicles exit the interstate until the treatment crews could address the ice, the particular advisory that truckers take seriously, because freezing rain on a mountain highway loaded to 80,000 pounds is the specific combination of conditions that produces the accidents that end careers and sometimes end more than careers. I pulled off at the Beckley stop around 3. The parking lot was empty, which was unusual for a truck stop on the interstate at any hour, but which the freezing rain explained, the other trucks having pulled off at stops further south before the ice reached its current intensity. My rig was the only vehicle in the lot, the cab and the trailer, already showing the glaze of ice that the rain was depositing on every horizontal surface. I killed the engine and sat in the cab for a moment and looked at the diner. The lights were on, the interior visible through the windows that faced the parking lot, the booths and the counter and the coffee station showing in the warm fluorescent light that the diner produced, the particular amber glow of a lit interior seen through rain-streaked glass. The diner looking exactly as it had looked every other time I'd been here, the standard configuration of a truck stop restaurant at 3 in the morning, open and lit, and waiting for whoever the highway delivered. I walked to the diner through the freezing rain, the ice already thick enough on the parking lot surface that each step required the careful placement of weight that ice-covered ground demands, the particular shuffle that people adopt when the surface beneath their feet has no friction, and the consequences of falling include the specific injuries that a parking lot at 3 a.m. produces when the nearest help is inside a building, 30 feet away. I opened the door. The warmth hit me immediately. The thermal differential between the frozen exterior and the heated interior producing the particular sensation of entering a warm space from a cold one, the body registering the change as relief, the muscles relaxing, the face thawing, the particular gratitude that a heated room produces in a person who has been in freezing rain. The diner was occupied. One customer, sitting in the booth nearest the window, the first booth on the right as you entered, the booth that faced the parking lot and that provided a view of the fuel island and the highway beyond. A man. Work clothes, the heavy cotton and the insulated jacket that outdoor laborers wear in the winter mountains. The particular uniform of a man who works with his hands in cold weather, the clothing functional and worn, and showing the particular use patterns that daily wear produces. He was sitting with his hands around a coffee cup. The cup was white, the standard ceramic that truck stop diners use, the cup positioned between his hands on the table surface, his fingers wrapped around it in the particular grip that people use when they're warming their hands on a hot cup, the posture of comfort and familiarity, a man sitting with his coffee in a diner at 3 in the morning, the way men have been sitting with their coffee in diners at 3 in the morning since diners existed. He did not look up when I entered. The door opening, the cold air entering the warm space, the particular disturbance that an arriving customer creates in a small diner, none of it produced a response from the man in the booth. He sat with his coffee and his stillness, and he did not raise his eyes from the cup, and he did not turn his head toward the door, and he did not acknowledge in any way that another person had entered the space. I sat 3 booths down, the particular spacing that strangers maintain in diners at 3 in the morning, close enough to be in the same space, and far enough apart to establish that the proximity is coincidental rather than social, the particular geography of diner seating that says we are both here and we are not together. The waitress appeared from the kitchen, a woman of maybe 50, the particular type that independent truck stop diners employ, experienced and efficient and possessed of the specific professional demeanor that a woman develops when she has been serving food to truckers at 3 in the morning for enough years that the work has become automatic and the customers have become interchangeable. She brought me a menu and a coffee without my asking for the coffee, the default offering that diners provide to anyone who sits down at 3 a.m., the assumption that coffee is why you're here and that the food is secondary. I ordered a burger and fries, the standard 3 a.m. order that the diner's menu provided and that the kitchen could produce in the 15 minutes that the cooking required. The waitress took the order and went to the kitchen, and I sat with my coffee and I looked at the man in the booth by the window. He had not moved. In the time between my entering the diner and the waitress taking my order, maybe 5 minutes, the man had not changed his position. His hands were around the cup. His head was inclined slightly downward, the posture of someone looking at the cup or at the table or at nothing. His body was still in the particular way that bodies are still when the person occupying them has achieved a state of rest so complete that the small, unconscious movements that living bodies constantly produce, the shifting of weight, the adjustment of posture, the particular restlessness that even a resting human generates, All of it was absent. He sat with the stillness of a photograph. The coffee in his cup was not steaming. I noticed this with the particular attention of someone who has spent 16 years drinking coffee in truck stop diners, and who knows what a hot cup of coffee looks like, and what a cold cup looks like, and who can tell the difference from across a room. Hot coffee steams in the air of a diner. The temperature differential between the coffee and the room produces visible vapor that rises from the surface in the particular curl that hot liquids produce in cool air. The man's coffee was not producing vapor. The cup was full, the coffee visible at a level just below the rim, the surface still and dark and showing no thermal activity. The waitress brought my food. I ate. The man sat in his booth and did not move. 15 minutes of eating, the time measured by the progress of the burger and the fries from plate to consumption, and the man's position did not change by any measurement I could detect. The hands on the cup, the head inclined, the body holding its perfect stillness. I asked the waitress. I waited until she came to refill my coffee, and I asked with the casual tone that the question seemed to warrant, nodding toward the booth by the window. I said, "Has he been here long?" The question delivered with the particular lightness of a man making conversation about a fellow customer. She looked at the booth. She looked directly at the booth where the man was sitting, her eyes tracking from my nod to the window booth with the particular directional attention of a person following an indication, the gaze landing on the booth and the man in it and the coffee cup in his hands. She said, "What customer?" The words arrived with the particular flatness of a genuine question, not a joke, not a deflection, but the honest inquiry of a woman who had looked at the booth and who had seen what the booth contained and who was reporting that the booth contained nothing that the word customer applied to. I looked at the booth. The man was there, sitting in the same position with the same cup and the same stillness that he'd maintained since I'd arrived. I was looking at him. The waitress was looking at the same booth, and the waitress saw nothing. I said, "The guy in the first booth." By the window, the clarification specific enough that the error, if there was an error, would be corrected by the specificity. She looked again. The same direction, the same booth, the same line of sight that terminated at a man sitting with a coffee cup in a truck stop diner at 3 in the morning. She said, "That booth's empty, honey." She said it with the particular patient tone that service workers use when a customer is confused, and when the confusion needs to be addressed without making the customer feel foolish. I looked at the man. The man sat in the booth. The coffee cup was in his hands. The stillness was complete. I ate the rest of my food. I paid the check. I put on my jacket and walked toward the door, and I passed the booth, and I looked at the man, and the man was there, 3 feet from me. The work clothes and the jacket and the hands on the cup, and the particular presence of a body in a booth that the waitress who worked 3 feet from him every night could not see. He did not look up as I passed. He sat with his coffee and his stillness, and I walked to the door and opened it, and the freezing rain hit me, and I crossed the parking lot to my rig and got in the cab and sat there and looked through the windshield at the diner window, where the first booth was visible from the outside. The booth was occupied, the man was sitting in it. Through the rain-streaked glass in the parking lot distance, the figure was visible in the warm light of the diner, sitting in the window booth with the coffee cup and the work clothes and the stillness that 45 minutes of observation had not interrupted. I've been back. Many times. The diner, a regular stop on a corridor I drive every week. The booth by the window is always empty. The waitress serves me without any indication that she remembers my question or the evening that prompted it. The diner functions as a diner functions. The coffee and the food and the 3 a.m. service provided to whatever truckers the highway delivers. The booth is empty. The waitress confirms it with the obliviousness of a woman who has never seen anything in the window booth that required her attention. But on a January night during freezing rain, a man sat in that booth with a cup of coffee that wasn't hot, and a stillness that wasn't rest, and a presence that I could see, and that the woman who worked beside him could not. And I wonder how many nights he sits there. In the booth by the window, facing the parking lot, the coffee in his hands, the stillness, absolute. Sitting in a diner that is lit and open and staffed, and that serves the truckers who come in from the highway without ever serving him, the waitress passing his booth without acknowledgement, the coffee never refilled, because the coffee was never ordered, because the customer in the window booth doesn't exist for anyone who works there. He exists for me. On one night, in one diner, during freezing rain, a man was sitting in a booth, and I could see him, and no one else could. And the booth is empty now, every time. And the coffee cup is gone. And the work clothes are gone. And the man is gone. Except he isn't. He's in the booth, at 3 in the morning, with his coffee, in the diner that is lit and open, and that holds him the way diners hold everyone who sits in them, with warmth and light, and the particular welcome that a diner provides at 3 a.m. to whoever walks in from the cold, even the ones the waitress can't see. Route 19 through Nicholas County, West Virginia, is a highway that the mountains dictate rather than the engineers, the road following the terrain through a landscape that is too steep and too deeply dissected by hollows and ridges to allow a straight line between any 2 points, the highway winding through the Appalachian Plateau in a series of curves and grades that the trucker in me respects and that the miles on the odometer reflect. The distance between towns on Route 19 always longer than the map suggests, because the map shows the straight line distance and the road shows the terrain's distance, the additional miles that the curves and the climbs and the descents add to every trip through these mountains. I've been driving Route 19 for 13 years, running loads between the lumber operations in the southern counties and the distribution points in the north, the particular commerce that the timber industry generates in a region where the forests have been cut and regrown and cut again for a century, and where the trucks that move the lumber are as much a feature of the highway as the pavement itself. The route is familiar in the way that 13 years of repetition makes anything familiar, the curves committed to muscle memory, the grades anticipated before the tachometer shows the change in engine load, the particular rhythm of the highway, internalized to the point where the driving requires attention, but not thought, the body performing the mechanical operations, while the mind floats above the process in the particular state of sustained alertness that long-haul trucking produces on routes that have been driven enough times to become automatics. October of 2022. A Saturday night, approaching midnight, the highway showing the particular emptiness that Route 19 produces at that hour on a weekend, the local traffic gone, the log trucks parked for the night, the highway belonging to whoever was on it, and to the rain that had been falling since the late afternoon. A steady, cold October rain that was not dramatic but persistent, the kind of rain that the mountains produce when a system stalls over the Alleghenies and the moisture continues without intensifying and without stopping, the rain a constant condition rather than an event. I was running north, loaded, a flatbed carrying bundled lumber from a mill in Fayette County to a yard in Lewis County, the load secured with chains and binders and the particular attention that lumber on a flatbed requires, because lumber shifts and because a shifted load on a mountain highway is a problem that the chains and the binders are designed to prevent, and that the driver checks at every stop because the consequences of failure are the consequences that you don't want to experience, and that the regulations exist to prevent. The highway was empty, not the relative emptiness of light traffic, but the absolute emptiness of a road that is carrying no vehicles in either direction. The headlights showing wet pavement and rain, and the tree lines on both sides, and nothing else. The particular solitude of a mountain highway at midnight, when the rain has discouraged whatever traffic the hour hadn't already eliminated. I drove at 50 miles per hour, the speed that the rain and the load and the road conditions permitted, the wipers beating their rhythm on the windshield, the engine maintaining its tone, the truck moving through the night with the particular isolation of the only vehicle on a highway that extends for miles in both directions, without another set of headlights. The headlights appeared at approximately 12:30. In my mirrors, behind me, at a distance that I estimated at about 200 yards. Not one set of headlights, multiple sets. Many sets, the lights appearing in the rear view and the side mirrors simultaneously, not accumulating one at a time, the way traffic builds when vehicles enter a highway from successive on-ramps or driveways, not the gradual assembly of a group of vehicles that happens to be traveling in the same direction. The lights appeared at once, the entire formation materializing in my mirrors in the same moment, as if a switch had been thrown and the highway behind me had gone from empty to occupied in the time between one mirror check and the next. I counted the lights, 8 sets, maybe 10. The rain and the distance made a precise count difficult, the headlights showing as paired points of light in the mirrors, each pair spaced at an equal distance from the pair ahead and the pair behind, the formation maintaining the particular regularity of a convoy, the vehicles traveling in a line with uniform spacing and uniform speed, the kind of formation that military convoys and commercial hauling operations produce. and that casual traffic never does, because casual traffic doesn't maintain equal spacing for any distance. The headlights were wrong. Not wrong in their position or their formation or their brightness, wrong in their color. Modern headlights produce a white or blue-white light, the color temperature of halogen and LED technology that the automotive industry adopted in the 1990s, and that has become universal in the decades since. The headlights in my mirrors were warm, a warm white that shaded toward yellow, the particular color that sealed beam headlights produced, the incandescent bulbs that automotive lighting used before the halogen transition, the lights that vehicles carried in the 1960s and the 1970s, and that have been functionally extinct on operating vehicles for decades. The lights were round, not the rectangular or shaped headlight configurations that modern vehicles use, but the round sealed beam units that were standard before the regulations changed and before the manufacturers began designing headlight shapes to match the body styling of the vehicles they illuminated. Round, warm white headlights, 8 to 10 pairs, in a convoy formation, maintaining 200 yards of distance behind a flatbed truck on Route 19 at midnight in October in the rain. I watched them. The mirrors provided a continuous view of the formation as I drove, the lights holding their positions with the rigid precision of vehicles that were either connected by physical linkage or operated by drivers who were maintaining formation with a discipline that exceeded any civilian traffic pattern I'd ever observed. The spacing between each set of headlights was identical, maybe 30 feet, the gap consistent across the entire convoy, the vehicles traveling as a unit rather than as individuals, the formation showing the particular cohesion that says organized rather than coincidental. I maintained my speed, 50 miles per hour, the pace that the load and the rain permitted. The convoy maintained its distance, 200 yards, the gap between my trailer and the lead vehicle of the formation holding steady, the convoy matching my speed with the particular precision that the headlight spacing had already demonstrated, the formation traveling at my pace without closing or falling back, the 200 yards fixed as if the distance were a setting rather than a variable. I slowed to 45. The convoy slowed. The distance held. I accelerated back to 50. The convoy accelerated. The distance held. The formation adjusted its speed to mine, with the instantaneous matching that I'd expected based on the precision of the spacing. The convoy not reacting to my speed changes but accompanying them, the formation and my truck operating as elements of the same system, the speed determined by me and matched by whatever was behind me. 12 miles. The convoy followed me for 12 miles through the rain on Route 19, the formation holding, the headlights maintaining their warm round glow in my mirrors, the spacing unwavering, the distance consistent. 12 miles of mountain highway through forested terrain with no towns, no intersections, no pull-offs. The road running through the particular isolation of Nicholas County at midnight, the convoy and my truck, the only vehicles in a landscape that held nothing but rain and forest and the highway. I tried to see the vehicles. At 200 yards in rain at night, the headlights were visible, but the vehicles behind them were not, the lights too bright relative to the darkness behind them, for my mirrors to resolve the shapes of the vehicles into identifiable forms. I could see that the headlight pairs were at heights consistent with trucks or large vehicles, not the lower position that cars produce. The lights elevated above the road surface at the height that cab over trucks and heavy equipment produces. The height was consistent across the formation. All the vehicles approximately the same size. The convoy composed of similar or identical vehicles traveling in formation on a highway at midnight. The intersection with Route 39 appeared. The highway widened from 2 lanes to 4 as it entered the small town of Somersville. The street lights and the closed businesses and the traffic lights, creating the particular illuminated environment that towns produce on highways that pass through them. The darkness of the mountain road giving way to the amber glow of sodium streetlights, and the red and green of signals, and the reflected light of wet commercial buildings. I checked my mirrors as I entered the town. The convoy was gone, not falling back, not turning off on a side road, not slowing at a distance that the increasing light of the town would have revealed. Gone. The mirrors showed the highway behind me, the 4 lanes of wet pavement reflecting the streetlights, the rain falling on a road that was empty in both directions, the particular vacancy of a highway at midnight in a small town where nothing is open and no vehicles are moving, and the only light is the infrastructure that the town maintains for the traffic that isn't there. 200 yards of highway behind my truck, where 8 to 10 sets of vintage headlights had been holding formation for 12 miles, showed nothing. Empty pavement, rain, streetlights, the complete absence of any vehicle in any direction. I pulled into the parking lot of a gas station that was closed for the night. I stopped the truck and I sat in the cab, and I looked at the mirrors, and the mirrors showed nothing, and the highway showed nothing, and the town of Summersville held its midnight quiet around me, while I processed the particular impossibility of a convoy of vehicles with 1960s headlights that appeared simultaneously and maintained formation for 12 miles and disappeared at a town. Convoys don't disappear. Vehicles don't materialize simultaneously on an empty highway. Headlights don't show the color temperature of sealed beam incandescent when sealed beam incandescent hasn't been standard in automotive lighting for 40 years. I've driven Route 19 through Nicholas County many times since that night. The highway is the highway. The rain is the rain. The mirrors show what the mirrors show, which is the road behind me, and whatever is on it, and on most nights nothing is on it except the pavement and the dark. I asked around. The particular careful inquiry that you make in communities where questions about strange things require the right tone and the right context. An old driver, a man who'd been running Route 19 since the 1980s, listened to my description of the convoy and the headlights and the formation and the disappearance at Summersville. He didn't ask me if I'd been drinking. He didn't suggest I'd been tired. He said coal trucks. He said the coal trucks used to run Route 19 inches convoys, the loaded trucks traveling in formation from the mines in the southern counties to the processing facilities in the north, the convoys running at night when the highway was empty, and the loaded trucks could maintain speed without the interference of civilian traffic. He said the convoys ran through the 1960s and 1970s, the trucks cab-over models with sealed beam headlights, the formations tight, the spacing uniform, the drivers maintaining the discipline that the companies required for efficient transport. He said Route 19 killed a lot of those drivers. The mountain grades and the loaded trucks in the rain and the night, and the particular physics of heavy vehicles on steep roads producing the accidents that the runaway ramps were eventually built to prevent. He said the convoys stopped in the early 1980s when the coal industry declined and the regulations changed and the particular era of nighttime convoy hauling ended. He said the trucks still run, not every night, not for every driver, but on certain nights, in certain conditions, the rain and the dark and the empty highway aligning in the particular configuration that produces the phenomenon. The convoys appear in the mirrors of the drivers who are running Route 19 at the hours when the coal trucks used to run, the headlights warm and round, and the formation tight, and the distance maintained for miles through the rain before the convoy reaches a town, and the lights disappear, and the highway is empty, and the mirrors show nothing. He said they're running their loads, still running, through the rain, in the dark. The convoy holding formation, the way the drivers were trained to hold it, the spacing maintained, the speed matched, the trucks running north with whatever they're carrying to wherever they're going, the route unchanged, the highway unchanged, the mountains unchanged, and the rain falls, and the mirrors show the highway, and on certain nights the headlights appear, warm and round and old, the lights of trucks that ran these mountains 50 years ago, still running, in formation, in the rain, in the dark, and the town comes, and the lights go, and the highway holds what it holds. I run refrigerated freight through the mountains of eastern Tennessee, which means I drive a truck with a trailer that maintains its own climate regardless of the climate outside it. The diesel-powered refrigeration unit on the trailer's nose producing the cold that keeps the cargo at temperature, while the cab produces the heat that keeps the driver at temperature, the two environments separated by the trailer wall and connected by the highway that both of them travel. The particular irony of hauling frozen goods through mountains that are producing their own cold is not lost on me. The November nights in the Appalachian ridges, cold enough that the refrigeration unit is working against ambient temperatures that are approaching its own target, the truck carrying cold through cold, the driver warm in the cab, while the cargo is cold in the trailer, and the mountains are cold around both. I've been running these routes for 10 years. The eastern Tennessee corridors that cross the Appalachian ridges between the valley towns and the distribution centers, the particular geography of freight movement in a region where the mountains create the obstacles and the highways overcome them with the engineering solutions that mountain interstates and secondary highways provide. the tunnels and the grades and the switchbacks that the terrain demands, and that the trucks navigate with the particular skill set that mountain driving requires. The routes take me through terrain that is beautiful and difficult, and that in November produces the conditions that make the driving both harder and more atmospheric. The rain and the fog and the early dark, combining to create the particular environment that eastern Tennessee generates when the autumn systems move through and the mountains extract every molecule of moisture from the air and deposit it on the highways and the hollows and the ridges. The CB radio is a fixture of the cab, not the primary communication tool that it was in the era before cell phones, when the CB was the trucker's lifeline, the connection to other drivers and to the particular community that the highway produces among the people who use it professionally. The CB now is supplemental, a backup communication system that I monitor on Channel 19 for traffic information and for the particular awareness that other drivers' transmissions provide, the reports of accidents and road closures, and weather conditions that travel the CB network faster than the official channels can disseminate them. I keep the radio on, the volume low, the squelch adjusted to filter out the static that the mountains produce, the CB providing a background murmur of trucker communication that is as much a feature of the cab environment as the engine noise and the heater fan. November of 2023, a Wednesday night, approximately 2 in the morning. I was driving a secondary highway through a hollow in the Unaka Mountains, the range that forms the Tennessee-North Carolina border and that produces some of the most rugged terrain in the southern Appalachians. The route was a 2-lane highway that crossed a ridge and descended into a hollow that ran for approximately 8 miles before connecting to a larger highway in the valley below. The hollow was narrow and deep, the ridges rising steeply on both sides, the road following a creek through the valley bottom, with the particular intimacy of a mountain road that shares its corridor with the water, the pavement and the creek side by side in a space that the terrain allocates with the minimum width that both require. The rain was heavy. November rain in the Unaka Mountains, the particular warm rain that the southern systems produce when they push into the Appalachians in late fall, the moisture abundant, the rainfall sustained, the wipers working at their highest setting, and the headlights penetrating maybe 60 feet of rain-filled air before the light scattered into the diffused glow that heavy rain produces when the water in the air exceeds what the headlights can cut through. The CB radio was on, Channel 19, the universal monitoring channel, the volume low, the speaker producing the occasional burst of static that the mountains generated as the terrain blocked and reflected the radio frequencies that the CB uses. The hollow was a dead zone, the ridges on both sides blocking the signals that other drivers produced, the CB picking up nothing but the static of a radio receiving no transmissions, the particular electronic quiet of a frequency that is being monitored by a radio that has nothing to monitor. The voice came on at approximately 2:15, not the burst of a transmission, not the break that truckers use to announce themselves on the channel, not any of the conventions that CB communication follows. The voice simply began, mid-word, as if I had tuned into a broadcast that was already in progress, the sound arriving in the speaker with the particular clarity of a close transmission, the signal strong and clean and free of the static that the hollow had been producing since I entered it. The voice was female, clear, measured, calm, the particular quality of a voice that is reading rather than speaking extemporaneously, the words delivered with the even cadence that a person produces when they are reading from a text and when the text requires no interpretation, the voice serving as a vehicle for the words, rather than an expression of the speaker's thoughts. The voice had the particular register of a woman of indeterminate age, not young and not old, the timbre suggesting maturity but not age, the kind of voice that could belong to a woman of 30 or 50, the age obscured by the particular neutrality of the delivery. The voice was reciting names, just names. First name, surname, spoken with a pause of approximately 2 seconds between each, the names delivered one at a time, with the measured pace of someone reading a list that is long and that requires the particular patience that a long list demands. Each name given its own space, each name articulated completely before the next one began. The names were Appalachian. The surnames were the surnames that these mountains have been holding for 200 years, the particular family names that the Scots, Irish, and the English settlers brought to these ridges in the 18th century and that their descendants have been carrying since. The Combs and the Baker and the Hensley and the Mullins and the particular roster of mountain surnames that constitute the genetic heritage of the communities that live in these hollows. I listened. The voice continued, name after name, the recitation steady and unhurried, the pace maintaining its 2-second interval between names, with the particular regularity of a metronome, the list proceeding without interruption, without comment, without any indication of the purpose that the recitation served, or the audience that it addressed. I changed channels. Turned the dial from channel 19 to channel 20. The voice was there. The same voice, the same name, the same cadence, the broadcast continuing on the new channel without interruption. I turned to channel 21. The voice. Channel 14. The voice. Every channel on the CB, from 1 through 40, carried the same broadcast, the same voice reading the same names at the same pace, the transmission present on every frequency that my radio could access, the voice occupying the entire CB spectrum with the particular ubiquity of a signal that was not being broadcast on a specific channel, but that was being broadcast on all of them simultaneously. I turned the radio off. The power switch, the physical disconnection of the radio from the electrical system, the particular mechanical action of a switch moving from the on position to the off position, the radio's power light extinguished. The display went dark. The electronics ceased functioning. The radio converting from an active receiver to an inert box of circuits and components that was not receiving power and that was not processing signals and that was not producing sound. The voice continued. From the speaker that was connected to a radio that was not powered, the voice continued its recitation, the names arriving through the speaker with the same clarity and the same cadence that they had maintained when the radio was on, the sound produced by hardware that was not functioning, the speaker generating audio from a source that the radio's electronics were not mediating because the radio's electronics were off. I stared at the speaker. The grill of the CB speaker mounted in the cab's headliner, the small rectangular surface that produces the audio that the radio receives and amplifies, the speaker that should have been silent because the amplifier that drives it was disconnected from power, and the receiver that feeds it was disconnected from the antenna. The voice came through the grill with the particular presence of a sound that is being produced close, the voice not diminished by the radio's deactivation, not degraded, not showing any indication that the source of the sound had been affected by the removal of the radio's power. I wrote names. The pen was in the cup holder, the notepad on the dash where I keep the pad that I use for load numbers and delivery addresses and the incidental documentation that trucking requires. I picked up the pen and I wrote the names as they came, the voice's pace slow enough that I could capture most of them, the 2-second intervals providing enough time to write the surname and the first name before the next pair arrived. I wrote for maybe 10 minutes, capturing the names with the particular urgency of someone who is documenting something that they know they'll need to verify later, the pen moving on the paper, with the focused attention of a man who is listening to something impossible and who is creating the physical evidence that the experience is real. The voice stopped when I exited the hollow. The transition was precise, the voice ceasing at the moment the truck crossed from the hollow into the wider valley where the secondary highway met the larger road, the particular geographic boundary between the narrow drainage and the open valley, serving as the point where the transmission ended, the voice cutting off mid-name, as cleanly as if the hollow's mouth were a switch, and crossing it turned the broadcast off. The radio was silent. I turned it back on. The power light illuminated. The display showed channel 19. The speaker produced the normal static of a CB monitoring an empty frequency. Normal function, the radio operating as a radio operates, receiving and processing and amplifying whatever the antenna delivers, the hardware performing within its design parameters without any indication that it had been producing sound from a deactivated state for 20 minutes. I looked at the notepad. The names were there. My handwriting, the particular scrawl that haste produces when you're writing while driving and listening and trying to capture information that is arriving at a pace that doesn't accommodate neat penmanship. I'd captured maybe 40 names, 40 first name and surname pairs written on a notepad in a truck cab at 2 in the morning in a hollow in the Unaka Mountains. I drove home. The delivery was completed. The load dropped at the distribution center. The paperwork filed. I went home with the notepad and the names and the particular weight of an experience that I couldn't explain, and that the notepad confirmed had happened because the names were there in my handwriting, and the handwriting was produced during the event and the event had produced the names. I researched the names. Not immediately, not with the urgency of a man who needs an answer today. Over the following weeks, in the particular way that mountain research happens, the inquiry conducted through the local channels that the communities provide, the county records and the church records, and the particular oral history that mountain people maintain for the families that have been in these hollows for generations. 7 of the names matched headstones. In a cemetery at the head of the hollow where the transmission had occurred, a small graveyard beside a church that had served the community that once occupied the hollow and that the declining population had reduced to a handful of families, and a church that held services once a month when a circuit preacher came through. The cemetery held maybe 60 graves, the headstones spanning the period from the early 1800s to the present, the particular record of births and deaths that mountain cemeteries maintain for the communities they serve. 7 of the names on my notepad were on headstones in that cemetery. 7 names that I had written while listening to a voice on a CB radio that was turned off, reciting from a list that included the names of people who were buried at the head of the hollow where the broadcast originated. I don't know who the other names belong to. The 40 names on my pad minus the 7 I identified leaves 33 names that I haven't matched to records, names that may belong to people buried elsewhere, or to people whose records the mountain's particular approach to documentation has not preserved, or to people whose identity the voice knows and that the records I've accessed do not. The voice was reading names. The names of the dead, or the names of the living, or some combination that includes both, and that the voice recites with the patient cadence of a list that is being maintained and updated and read aloud in a hollow in the Unaka Mountains at 2 in the morning during the rain. The broadcast transmitted on every frequency and through every radio, including the ones that are turned off, the names arriving in the speakers of whoever is driving through the hollow at the hour when the voice reads and the rain falls and the hollow holds its roll call. I've driven through the hollow since. The radio is quiet. The hollow produces its static and its dead zones, and the particular electronic silence of a drainage that blocks the signals that the ridges won't let through. But the notepad is in my glove box, and the names are in my handwriting, and 7 of them are on headstones at the head of the hollow. And the voice was calm, and the voice was measured, and the voice was reading a list that it has been reading, I suspect, for a very long time. Name by name, in the hollow, in the rain, on a frequency that the radio doesn't need to be on to receive. And the list is long, and the voice is patient, and the names continue, whether anyone is listening or not. I've been driving a logging truck in the mountains of western North Carolina for 14 years, which in the timber industry means I've spent 14 years negotiating the particular relationship between heavy loads and mountain terrain that logging requires. The trucks carrying 30 to 40 tons of timber from the cutting operations on the ridges to the mills in the valleys on roads that were built for the purpose of getting timber out of the mountains and that serve that purpose with the minimum investment in surface quality and width and maintenance that the economics of timber extraction will support. The roads are Forest Service roads, built and maintained by the federal government on national forest land, the surfaces ranging from reasonable gravel to theoretical gravel to bare earth that the rain converts to mud and the traffic converts to ruts and the winter converts to ice. The particular roads I drive are in the Pisgah and the Nantahala, the 2 national forests that cover the mountain terrain of western North Carolina, the steep ridges and the deep hollows, and the particular geography of the southern Appalachians, where the terrain is too steep for agriculture and where the forests that cover it have been the economic resource that the mountains provide to the people who live in them. The cutting operations sit on the ridges where the timber grows. The mills sit in the valleys where the water and the transportation and the flat ground that milling requires are available, and the trucks run between them on roads that climb and descend through terrain that extracts a toll on the trucks and the drivers and the tires and the brakes, and that in December, in rain, at 1 in the morning, produces driving conditions that the word challenging doesn't adequately describe. I drive at night because the logging roads are shared infrastructure, the Forest Service roads, serving hikers and hunters and recreational users during the day, and the timber trucks running at night when the recreational traffic is absent and the roads belong to whoever is on them. The night runs are standard in the industry. the trucks loading in the late afternoon at the cutting sites and running the loads to the mills for the morning shift, the drivers navigating the mountain roads in the dark, with the headlights and the experience and the particular intimacy with the terrain that 14 years of driving the same roads produces. The Forest Service road where it happened was one I'd been using for about 6 years, a gravel road that climbed from a valley near Brevard to a ridge in the Pisgah at approximately 4,000 feet. The road following a drainage for the first 3 miles, and then switchbacking up the mountainside for another 4 miles to the cutting operation at the top. The road was maintained to the standard that the Forest Service applies to timber roads, which is a standard that keeps them passable for loaded trucks, without investing in the aesthetic improvements that recreational roads receive. The surface graveled, the drainage culverts functional, the width sufficient for 1 truck with occasional turnouts where 2 trucks could pass. December of 2022, a Wednesday night, approximately 1 in the morning. The weather was rain, cold, December rain that was not yet freezing, but that was close. The temperature maybe 34 degrees, the rain hitting the windshield as liquid and coating the road surface with a layer of water that the gravel couldn't absorb fast enough. The surface running with the particular sheet flow that mountain roads produce when the rain exceeds the drainage capacity and the water finds its own path down the grade. I was running empty, heading up the mountain to the cutting site to load for a morning delivery. The truck lighter without the timber, but still heavy enough that the mountain grades required attention, the brakes and the gears, and the particular technique of climbing a loaded logging road in the rain at 1 in the morning, occupying the specific portion of my attention that mountain driving demands. I came around a curve at approximately the 3-mile mark, the point where the road left the drainage bottom and began the switchback climb up the mountainside, the curve tight and banked in the wrong direction, the road surface showing the running water that the drainage produced at this point. My headlights swept through the curve and illuminated the road ahead, and I braked. A work zone. On the road ahead, in the rain, in the 1 a.m. dark, a road crew was working. The visual information arrived in the order that road work presents itself to an approaching driver. The signs first, the orange warning signs with the diamond shape and the black lettering that says road work ahead, positioned at the approach distance that the regulations specify. The signs standing at the road's edge on the metal legs that temporary signs use. Then the cones, the orange traffic cones placed in a line along the road's edge, delineating the work zone, the cones reflecting my headlights with the particular brightness that the reflective bands on traffic cones produce. Then the equipment, the shapes of machinery visible in the headlights, a grader and what looked like a roller, the heavy equipment that road maintenance uses for surface work, the machines positioned at the road's edge, with the particular arrangement that active work produces, the equipment staged for use rather than stored, and the crew. Maybe 6 people, the figures visible in my headlights as they moved on the road surface and at the road's edge, performing the particular motions of road work, the bending and the shoveling and the operating of equipment that road maintenance requires. The crew wore work clothing, the dark, heavy gear that road workers wear, the reflective vests that regulations require for highway work showing in my headlights with the brightness that reflective material produces when it's lit from the front. But the crew was working without lights. This registered as the headlights showed me more of the scene. No work lights, the tower-mounted floods that road crews use to illuminate their work areas at night, the particular infrastructure of nighttime road work that makes the work zone visible for hundreds of yards, and that produces the concentrated brightness that allows workers to see the surfaces they're working on with the detail that road work requires. No headlamps on the workers. No vehicle-mounted spotlights, no illumination of any kind other than what my headlights provided. The equipment was running. I could see the diesel exhaust rising from the grader, the plume visible in the rain, the engine operating. But the equipment had no lights. No headlights on the grader, no clearance lights on the roller, no running lights or work lights or any of the illumination that highway equipment carries for nighttime operation. The machines were dark shapes, visible in my headlights, but producing no light of their own, the engines running and the bodies of the machines dark. A flagger stepped into the road. The particular motion of a flagger, the person positioned at the approach end of a work zone whose job is to control traffic through the zone. The flagger stepping into my lane and holding a sign. The sign said slow. The standard octagonal hand sign that flaggers use, one side reading stop and the other reading slow, the flagger presenting the slow side to me, the instruction to reduce speed and proceed through the zone at a pace that the work activity and the workers' safety demanded. I slowed. The truck decelerated from maybe 20 miles per hour to a crawl, the 5 miles per hour that slow means in a work zone. I drove through the zone at the pace the flagger indicated, the truck passing the cones and the equipment and the workers with the particular slow passage that work zones produce, the driver watching for workers in the road, and for equipment movement and for the hazards that active work creates for vehicles passing through. The workers were working. I could see them in my headlights as I passed, the figures moving with the practice motions of experienced road workers, the particular efficiency of people who know the work and who are performing it with the muscle memory that repetition creates. They were working on the road surface, the grader smoothing the gravel, the workers with shovels filling low spots, the activity consistent with routine road maintenance, the kind of surface work that the Forest Service does periodically to maintain the timber roads. They worked in the dark. My headlights illuminated them as I passed, and the darkness reclaimed them as I moved on, the figures visible for the seconds that the headlight beam covered them and then gone, the work zone behind me and the dark road ahead, the flagger and the crew and the equipment dissolving into the rain and the darkness as I drove out of the zone and continued up the mountain. I loaded the truck at the cutting site and drove back down the mountain at approximately 4 a.m. The work zone was gone. The road where the crew had been working showed nothing. No signs, no cones, no equipment, no workers. The section of road where I'd slowed to 5 miles per hour and driven through an active work zone 3 hours earlier was empty mountain road, the gravel surface showing the running water of the December rain and nothing else. I stopped the truck. I got out in the rain and I walked the section of road where the work zone had been. The surface showed no evidence of road work, no fresh gravel, the particular lighter color that new gravel shows against the darker weathered surface of existing road material. No grader marks, the parallel ridges that a grader blade produces in the surface when it smooths the gravel. No tire tracks from heavy equipment, no boot prints from workers. The road surface was the same surface I'd driven that morning when I'd come up to check the cutting site. The same gravel in the same condition, showing no intervention, no maintenance, no work of any kind. I drove to the Forest Service office the next morning. I asked the road maintenance supervisor whether a crew had been working on the road the previous night. He looked at me the way people look at you when you ask a question that has an obvious answer. He said no crew worked last night. He said no crew was scheduled to work on that road until the spring maintenance cycle. He said Forest Service road crews don't work at 1 in the morning in December in the rain because road crews work during daylight hours and because the budget doesn't include overtime for nighttime grading. I described what I'd seen: the signs, the cones, the equipment, the flagger, the 6 workers doing surface maintenance in the dark without lights. He listened with the particular attention of a man who is hearing something that he needs to evaluate and that he doesn't have a framework for evaluating. He said the equipment I described, the grader and the roller, matched the equipment that the Forest Service uses for road maintenance. He said the signs and the cones matched the traffic control that the regulations require for work zones. He said the work I described, surface grading and spot repairs, matched the maintenance that the Forest Service performs on timber roads. He said none of it was scheduled and none of it was authorized and none of it was performed. He said the road had not been worked on since the previous spring and would not be worked on until the following spring. I've driven that road dozens of times since. The road is the road: gravel, rain, the mountain grade, the particular surface conditions that a Forest Service timber road produces in every season. No work zones, no crews, no equipment operating in the dark without lights. But the flagger held a sign, and the sign said slow, and I slowed, and I drove through a work zone that was staffed and equipped and operating with the particular efficiency of experienced road workers performing routine maintenance on a mountain road at 1 in the morning in December in the rain, without a single light among them. And the road in the morning showed nothing, and the Forest Service says no one worked, and the surface shows no repair. And the work zone existed for the minutes that it took me to drive through it, and then it didn't exist anymore. And the road was the road, and the rain was the rain, and the dark was the dark. A crew that works in the dark, without lights, on roads that the morning shows as unworked, maintaining surfaces that the daylight says haven't been maintained. And I drove through them, at 1 in the morning, following the flagger's instruction, slowing for workers who were there and who were working and who were gone by the time I drove back 3 hours later. The mountain holds what it holds, and some nights it holds a road crew that works in the dark on roads that don't need the work, and that shows no evidence that the work was done. And the flagger holds the sign, and the sign says slow, and the truck slows, and the work zone passes. And in the morning the road is the road it was before, and the crew is gone, into the rain, into the dark, into whatever the mountain provides for workers who maintain its roads at hours when the living aren't watching. I don't pick up hitchhikers. I want to establish this at the beginning because the story involves a woman on the side of a road at 2 in the morning, and the question that people ask, the question that I ask myself in the seconds after I passed her, is why didn't you stop? The answer is policy. Not personal policy, not the casual preference of a man who'd rather drive alone. Industry policy, the particular caution that the trucking companies enforce and that the insurance companies require, and that the experience of driving empty mountain roads at 3 a.m. reinforces with the specific education that certain encounters provide. You don't stop for people on the road at night. You don't open your cab to strangers on highways where the distance between towns is measured in hollows, and where the people who are on the road at hours when nobody should be on the road are not always people whose intentions align with your safety. I've been driving Route 52 through McDowell County for 10 years, the particular corridor that runs through the southern coalfields of West Virginia, on a highway that follows the tug fork of the Big Sandy River, through terrain that is among the most economically depressed and most sparsely populated in the state. McDowell County has lost 80% of its population since the peak of the coal era, the communities that the mines built emptying as the mines closed, the houses going dark, the businesses shutting, the particular decline that extractive industries leave behind when the extraction is complete and the industry moves on. The highway through the county runs past the evidence of this decline, the closed stores and the empty houses and the particular quality of a landscape that was populated for a specific economic purpose, and that the end of that purpose has been slowly returning to the state it occupied before the coal was discovered. Route 52 at night is a particular kind of empty, not the empty of a highway between cities where the road connects two populated points, and the emptiness between them is temporary, a condition of distance rather than abandonment. Route 52 at night is the empty of a road that passes through communities that are becoming empty themselves, the towns showing fewer lights each year, the hollows holding fewer occupied houses, the highway carrying less traffic because there are fewer people to generate it. Driving Route 52 at 2 a.m. is driving through a landscape that is in the process of being vacated, the particular loneliness of a road that served a purpose, and that is slowly losing that purpose, the way a retired person slowly loses the routines that work provided. February of 2023, a Wednesday night, approximately 2 a.m. I was running a load of equipment from a yard in Welch to a construction site in Williamson, a run that took me northwest on Route 52 through the heart of McDowell County, the highway following the river through a series of hollows and small towns, that the route connected like a thread through beads, the towns appearing as clusters of streetlights and then disappearing behind me as the highway entered the next hollow and the darkness closed in again. The rain had started around midnight. A cold February rain, not quite freezing, the temperature hovering at 33 or 34 degrees, warm enough that the precipitation fell as rain rather than ice, but cold enough that the rain carried a particular hostility, the wetness and the cold combining to produce conditions that were miserable for anyone exposed to them, the kind of rain that penetrates clothing and that draws heat from the body with the relentless efficiency of a medium that is both wet and cold, and that makes hypothermia a consideration for anyone who is outside in it without protection. The hollow where it happened was between two towns, a stretch of Route 52 that ran through uninhabited terrain for approximately 5 miles, the highway following the river, through a narrow valley where the mountains pressed close on both sides, and where the forest grew to the edge of the pavement, and where the houses that had once lined the road had been abandoned and demolished or had simply collapsed. The particular fate of unoccupied structures in the mountain climate where the snow load and the moisture and the decades take apart what the builders assembled. The hollow was dark in the way that McDowell County hollows are dark at 2 a.m., the sky blocked by clouds, the rain filling the air, the headlights showing pavement and spray, and the tree lines on both sides, and nothing else. I saw her from maybe 100 yards away, in the headlights, On the right shoulder, a figure standing at the edge of the pavement, where the road met the gravel that served as a shoulder before the terrain dropped away into the embankment that descended to the river below. The figure was standing, not sitting, not crouching, not in any posture that suggested injury or distress. Standing, the particular upright stance of a person who was positioned at the road's edge by choice rather than by circumstance. As the truck approached and the headlights resolved the figure into detail, I saw the dress, a cotton dress, the fabric patterned, the particular style of a house dress that women wore for daily wear in the mountain communities, the functional, comfortable garment that serves as the default clothing for domestic work, and that my grandmother wore every day of her life in the hollow where she lived. The dress was soaked. The fabric hung on the figure with the particular weight and the particular cling that saturated cotton produces, the material dark with water, the pattern visible but muted by the rain that had drenched it, the dress showing the outline of the body beneath with the intimacy that wet fabric imposes. No coat, no hat, no umbrella, no covering of any kind that a person standing in freezing rain at 2 in the morning would possess if they were a person who was outside by choice or by any circumstance that involved rational decision-making. The woman was standing in the rain in a cotton dress and nothing else, the particular wrongness of the clothing registering in my brain with the same priority as the wrongness of the location, the combination of the two producing the specific assessment that the trucking industry's policy was designed to address, the person on the road who doesn't fit the pattern of anyone who should be on the road. I did not stop. The truck passed the figure at approximately 50 miles per hour, the headlights illuminating her for maybe 3 seconds, the particular window of time that a vehicle traveling at highway speed provides for observing a stationary object at the road's edge. In those 3 seconds, I saw the dress in the rain and the absence of protective clothing and the posture and the position on a shoulder that was at the edge of a 40-foot embankment, and the particular stillness of a woman who was standing in freezing rain without any visible discomfort, the body showing none of the postural responses that cold and wet produce in a living person. No hunching, no arms crossed for warmth, no shivering, the figure standing in the rain, the way a post stands in the rain, present and vertical and unaffected. She turned her head as I passed. The motion registered in my peripheral vision as the truck moved past her position, the particular tracking movement of a head that follows a moving object, the head rotating on the neck to maintain visual contact with my cab as the truck passed. The motion was smooth, the rotation of the head matching the truck's speed with the particular precision of a tracking system, rather than the jerky approximation that a human produces when they follow a fast-moving object with their eyes. The head turned and the eyes, which I could not see in the rain and the dark, but which I could feel, followed the truck with a particular attention that is not looking but watching. The distinction between casual observation and focused surveillance communicated through the quality of the tracking rather than through any visible feature of the face. I checked the mirror. The right side mirror aimed to show the shoulder and the road behind the trailer. The rain and the darkness reduced the mirror's view to a narrow field of reflected light, the pavement showing the wet surface and the spray from the tires and the particular darkness of a mountain highway at night. The shoulder was empty. The spot where the woman had been standing, the section of pavement edge that I'd passed maybe 3 seconds earlier, showed nothing. The gravel shoulder was there, the embankment edge was there, the rain was falling on the surface, and the figure was not there. In the 3 seconds between my passing and my mirror check, the woman had departed from a location that offered 2 exits, crossing the road to the opposite shoulder, which the mirror would have shown, or descending the embankment to the river 40 feet below, which the terrain and the conditions made as close to impossible as any physical movement can be in the dark in the rain on a slope that was steep enough to be classified as an embankment rather than a hillside. I drove. The particular forward motion of a man who has seen something that his policy told him to pass, and that his instincts told him to pass, and that his mirror has now told him was not there to stop for. The 3-part confirmation that stopping was not required, and that continuing was the correct response. I drove the remaining miles to Williamson and made the delivery, and drove back through the hollow in the gray light of the February dawn, and looked at the shoulder where the woman had been standing. The shoulder was narrow, narrower than I'd perceived in the headlights, the gravel edge of the pavement providing maybe 2 feet of level surface before the ground dropped away at the embankment, the slope descending at an angle of maybe 45 degrees through brush and small trees to the river below, The embankment was soft. The February rain had saturated the soil, the surface of the slope showing the dark, muddy consistency of earth that has absorbed all the water it can hold and that records every impression with the fidelity of fresh concrete. A person stepping off the shoulder and onto the embankment would have left marks. A person descending the embankment would have left a trail of compressed soil and displaced vegetation that the rain would not have erased in the hours between 2 a.m. and dawn. The embankment showed nothing. No footprints, no slide marks, no displaced vegetation. The surface was undisturbed, the soil smooth and intact, the brush and the small trees growing at the angles that they'd always grown at, showing no evidence that anyone had descended the slope in any recent period. I stood on the shoulder, 2 feet of gravel between the pavement and the embankment edge. A 40-foot drop to the river. No crossing the road that my mirror didn't show. No descent of the embankment that the mud didn't record. A woman standing on 2 feet of gravel at 2 in the morning in freezing rain in a cotton dress, who was there when my headlights found her, and who was not there when my mirror checked 3 seconds later. I've driven that hollow at night many times since. The shoulder is empty. The embankment drops. The rain falls on gravel that holds nothing, and the hollow runs dark between the towns, and the road carries whoever drives it through the particular emptiness that McDowell County produces at 2 a.m. I asked about her, carefully, in the way that you ask about things in mountain communities, where the asking itself is a signal that you've seen something, and where the seeing makes you part of a conversation that the community has been having quietly for a long time. An old man in Welch, a retired miner who'd lived in the county his whole life, listened to my description. The location, the shoulder, the dress, the rain. He didn't ask me what she looked like. He didn't ask me if I was sure. He said she's been there a long time. He said people have been seeing her on that shoulder for as long as he can remember. He said his father saw her. He said the dress and the rain and the particular posture at the embankment edge have been reported by drivers and by residents, and by anyone who passes through that hollow at the right hour, in the right conditions for decades. He said a woman went over that embankment a long time ago, before the highway was widened, when the road was narrower and the shoulder was smaller and the embankment was steeper. He said she went over in the rain, in the dark, in February, and that the river took her and that she was found downstream 3 days later. He said she stands where she went over, at the edge, in the rain, in the dress she was wearing when she fell, standing at the shoulder that exists now where the edge existed then, the road wider, the shoulder different, the embankment regraded, but the location the same, the particular point in the hollow, where a woman went over an embankment in February in the rain, and where a woman stands in February in the rain, and where the truck drivers pass at 2 a.m. and check their mirrors and see nothing on a shoulder, where something was standing 3 seconds earlier. She stands there, in the rain, at 2 a.m., in the dress, and the embankment drops below her, and the river runs at the bottom, and the rain falls on the gravel where she stands and where she stood, and where she will stand the next time the conditions align, and the hollow decides to show what it holds in the dark, at the hour when the rain is cold and the road is empty, and the shoulder holds a woman who went over the edge, a long time ago, and who stands there still, watching the trucks pass, turning her head, tracking the headlights with the smooth precision of eyes that follow without seeing and that watch without needing. And the mirror shows nothing, and the mud shows nothing, and the shoulder holds what it holds. In the rain, in February, at 2 in the morning on Route 52 inches, McDowell County, where a woman stands, and stands, and stands. I haul lumber because lumber is what the mountains of eastern Kentucky produce, and because hauling it is what flatbed drivers in this part of the state do. The particular economy of the region, converting standing timber into dimensional lumber at the mills that operate in the hollows, and the flatbed trucks converting the lumber at the mills into lumber at the construction sites and lumber yards that buy it. I've been running lumber for 14 years, which means I've loaded and secured and transported approximately 5,000 loads of wood products through mountain terrain that tests every load and every chain and every binder with the particular physics of weight on, grades, the combination of gravity and momentum and friction that mountain driving imposes on loads that are heavy and that want to shift, and that the securing system is designed to prevent from shifting because a shifted load on a 10% grade is not an inconvenience but a catastrophe. I know loads. I know how lumber behaves on a trailer, the particular characteristics of bundled wood as cargo, the way the weight distributes across the deck, the way the chains hold the bundles against the lateral forces that curves produce, and the longitudinal forces that grades produce. I know what a shifted load feels like from the cab, the particular motion that the truck transmits to the driver when the cargo moves, the suspension compressing on the side that receives the shifted weight and releasing on the side that lost it, the truck leaning into the shift with a deliberateness that the driver feels through the seat and the steering wheel, the particular language of load movement that 14 years of hauling has made as readable as printed text. The pull-off was on a mountain road in Breathitt County, a widened section of shoulder where the road crossed a ridge and where the terrain on both sides dropped away steeply enough that the pull-off existed as a flat area above the void. The particular geography of mountain pull-offs, where the level ground is created by filling the low side of the road with compacted earth and gravel, and where the trucks that park on them are sitting on man-made ground that provides the level surface that the natural terrain doesn't. I use the pull-off regularly, a stop on a route that I drove twice a week. The particular point where I checked the load and the chains after the climb to the ridge and before the descent on the other side. The routine of mountain hauling, requiring the checks that the regulations mandate and that the physics justify. September of 2022, a Thursday night, approximately midnight, I was parked at the pull-off, waiting. A weather advisory had been issued for the county, the steady rain that had been falling since the evening, intensifying enough that the county had recommended commercial vehicles avoid the secondary highways until the visibility improved, the particular advisory that lumber haulers in this region take seriously because the loads we carry are heavy and the roads we use are narrow, and the rain reduces the visibility and the traction simultaneously. The combination of conditions that produces the accidents that the advisory exists to prevent. I'd check the load before parking. The standard check, walking the length of the trailer with a flashlight, checking each chain and each binder for tension and engagement, confirming that the lumber was in position, the bundles aligned, the stack straight, the load sitting on the trailer in the configuration that I'd built at the mill, and that the chains were maintaining against the forces of the drive. Everything was secure, the chains were tight, the binders were engaged. The load was as stable as a properly secured load of lumber can be on a flatbed trailer. The wood and the steel working together to resist the movement that the road had been trying to produce and that the securing system had been successfully preventing. I was in the cab, engine off, the parking brake set, the truck stationary on the level surface of the pull-off, the rain hitting the cab roof with the particular percussion that steady rain produces on sheet metal, the sound constant and rhythmic, and filling the cab with the white noise that makes sleeping in a truck during rain one of the more peaceful experiences that trucking provides. I wasn't sleeping. I was waiting. The phone showing the weather radar, the rain system tracking across the county in the slow eastward drift that September systems produce, the advisory likely to clear within an hour or two, the waiting a temporary pause in the route rather than a stop. The truck moved, not the wind. The wind on a mountain ridge can rock a high-profile vehicle. The particular lateral force that exposed terrain produces when the wind crosses the ridge and encounters the broadside of a trailer. But this wasn't wind. The wind was light, the rain falling nearly vertical, the conditions not producing the lateral force that would move a loaded flatbed on a level surface, not a passing vehicle. The pull-off was empty except for my truck, and the road was empty in both directions. The midnight traffic on a secondary highway in Breathitt County during a weather advisory reduced to zero, no other vehicles moving, no displacement of air from a passing truck that might rock a parked one. The truck moved because the load moved. I know what a load shift feels like. 14 years of hauling lumber through mountains has calibrated my body to detect the specific motion that cargo produces when it shifts on a trailer, the suspension responding to the transfer of weight from one side to the other, with a compression and a release that is as distinctive as a fingerprint, the truck leaning in response to a mass that is moved laterally across the deck. The right side of the trailer compressed. The suspension on the right dropped, maybe an inch, the springs absorbing a weight that had arrived on that side. The truck leaning right with the particular deliberateness of a flatbed responding to a load shift. Then the left side compressed as the right released, the weight transferring from right to left, the truck reversing its lean, the load moving across the trailer from one side to the other. I got out, in the rain, in the midnight dark, with the flashlight in my hand, and the particular urgency of a man who has felt his load shift and who needs to check the securing system before the shift becomes a failure. I walked the length of the trailer. I checked every chain. I checked every binder. I inspected the lumber. Nothing had moved. The load was in position. The bundles were aligned. The chains were tight. The binders were engaged. Every piece of lumber was exactly where I'd loaded it. The stack straight, the securing system intact. The load showing no evidence of movement, no displaced chain, no loosened binder, no gap between bundles that hadn't been there when I'd checked an hour earlier. I stood in the rain beside the trailer, and I looked at a load that had not moved on a truck that had moved because the load had moved, and I processed the contradiction with the particular focus of a man whose livelihood depends on understanding what loads do, and whose understanding was telling him that what the truck had done required a load shift and that the load had not shifted. I got back in the cab. I sat in the seat and I dried my hands and I looked at the rain on the windshield and I waited for the advisory to clear. The truck moved again. The same motion, right side down, the suspension compressing, the truck leaning into a weight transfer that was tracking from left to right across the trailer deck. Then right side up, left side down, the weight returning, the truck reversing its lean with the deliberate pace of a mass moving across a 20-foot wide surface. I felt it through the seat, through the frame of the truck and the springs of the seat and the contact between the seat and my body. The particular transmission of a load shift communicated from the trailer, through the fifth wheel, through the cab frame, through the seat, through my body, and into my awareness with the undeniable clarity of a physical event. The truck was responding to a weight transfer. The weight transfer was real. The physics that produced the motion required a mass to be moving across the trailer. And the lumber, which was the mass on the trailer, was not moving. Something else was on the trailer, something heavy enough to shift the suspension. Something that was moving laterally across the deck, from one side to the other and back, the weight transferring with the particular pace of a deliberate crossing rather than a sudden shift, the motion taking maybe 5 seconds to complete each traverse. The pace consistent with something walking the width of the flatbed, crossing the 20 feet of deck surface with the measured steps of an organism that was covering the distance at a walking pace. I sat in the cab, and I felt the third shift. Right to left, 5 seconds. The suspension responding, the truck leaning, the load motionless in the chains that held it while something that was not the load walked across the trailer above the lumber. The fourth shift, left to right, same pace, same duration. The weight traversing the deck with the consistent speed of a crossing that was being performed repeatedly, back and forth, the particular pattern of pacing, the lateral walk that something was performing on the deck of my flatbed in the rain at midnight on a pull-off in Breathitt County. I looked at the side mirror. The mirror was aimed to show the length of the trailer, the standard configuration that allows the driver to monitor the load from the cab. The rain and the dark reduced the mirror's view to a narrow field of wet reflection, the lumber visible as a dark mass on the deck, the chains showing as lines against the lighter color of the wood. I could see the trailer. I could see the load. I could not see what was walking on it. The weight shifted again, right to left. The truck leaned. The suspension responded. And the mirror showed nothing on the trailer except the lumber and the chains and the rain falling on a surface that something heavy was walking across. 5 times. Over the course of approximately an hour, the truck shifted 5 times, each shift following the same pattern, the weight traversing the deck from one side to the other with the pace of a walking stride, the suspension responding with the particular motion that a lateral weight transfer produces, the truck leaning and recovering, and leaning again as whatever was on the trailer crossed and recrossed the 20-foot width of the deck. The shifts stopped around 1 a.m. The 5th traverse completed, right to left, and the truck settled into its level stance, and the suspension held its neutral position, and the rain continued, and the cab was still, and the trailer was still, and the hour between the first shift and the last was over. I didn't get out again. The first check had shown me everything that the physical evidence was going to show me, which was nothing. A load that was secure, and a trailer that was responding to a weight that the load was not producing. Getting out again would have put me on the ground beside a trailer, where something that I couldn't see was heavy enough to shift a loaded flatbed suspension, and the particular calculus of risk assessment that trucking develops told me that being in the cab was better than being on the ground. The advisory cleared at 2. I started the engine and pulled off the pull-off and drove the descent on the other side of the ridge with the particular attention of a driver who is monitoring his load with more intensity than usual, the mirrors showing the trailer and the lumber and the chains and nothing else, the load behaving normally, the truck tracking straight, the suspension showing the level, balanced stance of a flatbed carrying a properly secured load through a mountain descent. The load was fine, the delivery was fine, the lumber arrived at the yard and was unloaded, and the chains were removed, and the trailer was empty, and I drove home, and I sat in my kitchen, and I thought about what had walked across my trailer in the rain. I've parked at that pull-off many times since. The load has never shifted. The suspension has never compressed without cause. The trailer has sat level on the gravel while I checked the chains, and the rain fell and the midnight passed without the particular motion of something heavy walking across the deck. But I felt it 5 times, the weight moving right to left and left to right with the pace of walking steps on a 20-foot surface. The truck leaning into each traverse. The suspension responding to a mass that the mirror couldn't show and that the flashlight couldn't find and that the load didn't produce. Something walked my trailer, in the rain, at midnight, on a pull-off in the mountains where the lumber sat in its chains and didn't move, while something that wasn't lumber walked back and forth across the deck above it. I don't know what walks flatbed trailers in the rain. I don't know what weighs enough to shift a loaded suspension, and that can't be seen in a mirror or illuminated by a flashlight. I don't know what crosses a 20-foot deck 5 times in an hour at a walking pace and then stops and leaves the trailer to the lumber in the rain. The pull-off holds what it holds. The ridge crosses above. The road descends on both sides, and on certain nights, at midnight, in the rain, something walks the flatbed that is parked there. Back and forth, heavy enough to move a truck, invisible enough to be nothing in the mirror, and the lumber sits, and the chains hold, and the trailer leans with the weight of something that is there, and that is walking, and that the morning will deny, and that the night, in the rain, on the ridge, confirms with the undeniable physics of a suspension that compresses under a weight that nothing visible produces. I deliver packages to places that UPS won't go, and that FedEx won't go, and that the Postal Service delivers to only because the federal mandate requires it, the particular addresses in the mountains of Southwest Virginia that exist at the ends of roads that the mapping applications show as lines so faint they're barely visible, and that the reality shows as pavement that transitions to gravel, that transitions to dirt, that transitions to the particular state of a road that has given up being a road and has become a suggestion, the terrain's permission for passage expressed as 2 tire tracks through grass rather than a maintained surface. I've been driving for the company for 8 years, which is long enough to have developed the particular knowledge that rural delivery requires, the database of roads and addresses, and the mountain people who occupy them that the GPS can't provide, and that the experience of driving every road in the territory accumulates over years of deliveries in every season and weather. Dickinson County is part of my territory, the westernmost county in Virginia, sitting against the Kentucky border, in the particular geography of the coal fields where the hollows are deep and the ridges are high, and the communities that the coal industry built are thinning the way all coalfield communities are. Thinning, the population declining, the houses emptying, the roads serving fewer addresses with each passing year. I know every road in Dickinson County, or I thought I did. 8 years of deliveries, the routes repeating, the addresses cycling through the manifest with the regularity that rural delivery produces, the same families ordering the same categories of goods from the same online retailers, the packages arriving at the distribution center, and the manifest generating and the routes assembling, and the truck loading, and the driving beginning, and the deliveries completing in the particular rhythm that the job imposes. October of 2023, a Wednesday night, the late run, the particular shift that the company schedules for deliveries that have been designated as time-sensitive and that require evening or nighttime delivery to meet the guaranteed windows that the shippers pay for. The late run is the shift that nobody wants and that I'd accepted because the overtime was useful and because the driving at night, while less pleasant than the daytime routes, had the particular advantage of empty roads and the absence of the traffic that the mountain highways produce during business hours. The rain started around 7. A cold October rain, steady, the temperature in the low 40s, the particular rain that the mountains of Southwest Virginia produce when the October systems move through, and the moisture meets the cold air that the elevation and the latitude combine to generate. The rain was not heavy enough to impair the driving, but constant enough to create the conditions that night delivery in the mountains produces. The headlights showing wet pavement and rain, and the particular darkness that mountain roads hold when the clouds block whatever light the sky might provide. The address was on the manifest. A standard entry, the name and the address and the package tracking number and the delivery window, the particular data that the logistics system generates for every package and that the driver uses to navigate to the delivery location. The address was in Dickinson County, on a road that the GPS showed as a secondary route branching off a state highway and running approximately 3 miles into a hollow before ending at the address. I didn't recognize the road. This was unusual after 8 years. I knew every road in my delivery territory by name and by character, and by the particular challenges that each one presented, the narrow sections and the steep grades and the turnarounds that were too tight and the driveways that were too muddy. This road was not in my memory. The GPS showed it, the blue line tracking from the state highway into the hollow, but my 8 years of driving had not produced a delivery on this road, and my mental catalog of Dickinson County roads did not contain it. I followed the GPS. The highway turnoff was where the GPS said it would be. A right turn onto a paved road that descended from the highway into a hollow. The road 2 lanes, the surface showing the particular condition of a county road that was maintained but not recently. The pavement intact but showing the cracks and the patches that age and weather produce. The road entered the hollow, and the terrain closed in, the ridges pressing close, the forest dark on both sides, the headlights showing the road ahead, and the rain, and the particular narrowing of the world that hollows produce when you drive into them at night. Mailboxes appeared at the intervals that rural roads produce, the metal boxes on posts at the road's edge, marking the driveways that led to houses set back from the road in the forest or on the hillsides. The mailboxes were standard, the rural delivery boxes that the Postal Service requires, some showing names and some showing numbers, and some showing nothing. The particular variety that mountain roads display when the residents maintain their mailboxes with varying levels of attention. The road continued for approximately 3 miles, climbing gradually as the hollow narrowed, the pavement maintaining its condition, the mailboxes becoming less frequent as the distance from the highway increased. The GPS showed the address ahead, the blue dot approaching the destination marker, with the steady progress of a truck moving at 30 miles per hour through a hollow in the rain. The house appeared in the headlights at the end of the road. A 2-story frame structure, the construction typical of the houses that the mountain communities produce. A frame building with clapboard siding and a covered porch and windows that showed lights, the warm glow of interior illumination visible through the glass and through the rain, the particular look of an occupied house on a dark night, the light saying someone is home, the porch saying welcome, the driveway saying pull in. I pulled into the gravel driveway. The truck's tires crunched on the wet gravel, with the particular sound that delivery trucks produce on mountain driveways, the heavy vehicle compressing the loose stone, the sound familiar and ordinary. I parked and got out with the package and walked to the porch, through the rain, and climbed the steps that the porch provided, and stood at the front door and knocked. A woman answered. She opened the door and she was standing in the lit interior of a house that was warm and furnished and occupied, the particular configuration of a mountain home that is lived in, the furniture visible behind her in the room that the open door revealed, a couch and a table, and the particular arrangement of objects that a home contains when a person lives in it and maintains it. She was wearing a sweater, and she was holding the door open, and she was looking at me with the particular expression that people produce when a delivery driver arrives at their door, the mild surprise, and the mild anticipation, and the readiness to receive whatever the driver is carrying. I said the company name and the standard greeting, and I held out the electronic device for the signature. She signed, the stylus moving across the screen with the particular motion of a person signing their name, the signature appearing on the device with the digital rendering that the system produced, the name legible, the signature complete. She took the package. She said thank you. She closed the door. The interaction lasted maybe 30 seconds, the standard duration of a routine delivery, the exchange of package for signature that I performed dozens of times every shift. I drove back down the hollow. The road unwinding in reverse, the mailboxes passing, the highway appearing at the mouth of the hollow, the delivery complete, the manifest updated, the route continuing to the next address. I filed the delivery confirmation at the dispatch office at the end of the shift. The dispatcher, a man named Carl, who had been running logistics for the company for 20 years, and who knew the delivery territory with the comprehensive knowledge that his position required, looked at the address on the confirmation and paused. He said that road's been closed since 2019. He said it the way you say something that contradicts what the person you're talking to has just told you, the particular delivery of information that is offered as correction rather than conversation. He said the last family on that road moved out in 2019. He said the county had closed the road to through traffic and had reduced the maintenance to the minimum that legal requirements demanded. He said the house at the end of the road had burned down in 2017. I told him I'd been there 2 hours ago. I told him the road was open and paved and showing mailboxes, and that the house at the end was standing and lit and occupied, and that a woman had answered the door and signed the confirmation and taken the package. Carl looked at me with the particular expression of a man who has been running logistics in the mountain counties for 20 years, and who has encountered situations that the logistics don't accommodate, and who processes them with the practical patience of a man whose job is to document deliveries rather than to explain them. He pulled up the county records on his computer. He showed me the screen. The road was listed as closed. The address was listed as a vacant lot. The property records showed a structure destroyed by fire in September of 2017, the fire department report documenting a total loss, the structure reduced to foundation and chimney, the property unoccupied since the fire, and listed in the county records as vacant. I drove back the next morning. Saturday, daylight, the October sun providing the visibility that the previous night's rain had withheld. I drove to the highway turnoff, and I took the right turn onto the road that I'd driven the night before. The road was there. The pavement was there. But the pavement was deteriorated beyond what the previous night had shown me. The surface cracked and broken, the edges crumbling into the ditches, the particular advanced deterioration of a road that has not been maintained in years, the condition far worse than what my headlights had revealed the night before. The mailboxes were there, but they were tilted and rusted, and showing the particular neglect of boxes that have not received mail in years. The posts rotting, the doors hanging open, the names and numbers faded beyond legibility. I drove to the end of the road. 3 miles, the same 3 miles I'd driven the night before. The hollow the same, the terrain the same, the road arriving at the same termination point where the house had been. The house was not there. A foundation sat in the weeds, the concrete walls of a basement visible above the ground level. The particular ruin that a burned structure produces when the fire takes the wood and the heat cracks the concrete, and the years fill the basement with debris, and the weeds grow through the rubble. A chimney stood at one end, the stone stack rising from the foundation to a height of maybe 20 feet. The chimney intact, because stone survives what wood doesn't, the structure standing alone in the vacant lot like a monument to the house that had surrounded it. No porch, no windows, no lights, no door for a woman to answer. The address that I'd delivered to 8 hours earlier was a vacant lot with a burned foundation and a standing chimney and weeds growing through the concrete, and the absolute absence of the 2-story frame house that my headlights had shown me and that a woman had opened the door of, and that the delivery confirmation documented with a signature and a timestamp and a GPS coordinate that matched the vacant lot where nothing stood. The delivery confirmation is in the system. Carl filed it. The signature is there, clear and legible. The name of a woman who signed for a package at the door of a house that burned down in 2017. The name matches no one in the county records. No person by that name in Dickinson County, current or historical, living or dead. The signature belonging to someone who doesn't appear in any system that documents the existence of people in this county. The package. I think about the package. The physical object that I carried to the porch and handed to the woman, and that she took through the door into the lit interior of a house that the morning showed as a burned foundation and a standing chimney. The package is not on the vacant lot. It's not in the rubble. It's not at the foundation or at the chimney or anywhere on the property that a package could be if it had been delivered to an address that exists as a vacant lot. The package went somewhere, through a door that was there at 10 p.m. and that wasn't there at 10 a.m. into a house that the fire took in 2017, and that the night rebuilt in 2023, and that the morning took again. Signed for by a woman who doesn't exist in any record, and who stood in a lit doorway in the rain and said thank you, and closed a door that has been gone for 6 years. I still deliver in Dickinson County. The manifest generates, the addresses appear, the truck loads, the routes assemble, and every address is an address I know, a house that exists, a road that is open, a door that a person answers, and that the morning confirms. Every address except one night, one road, one house that burned down 6 years before I delivered to it, and that stood in the rain with its lights on and its porch and its door, and a woman who signed for a package and who said thank you, and the morning showed nothing. The foundation and the chimney and the weeds and the signature is in the system, and the package is gone, and the house is gone, and the road runs into the hollow, and the hollow holds what it holds. And on certain nights, in certain rain, at certain hours, a house stands at the end of a road that has been closed since 2019. Its lights on, its door ready to open, waiting for whoever the road brings to the address that the county says is vacant and that the night says is home.